Wu Shuang. Seeing Jian Wushuang shooting toward the entrance of the Land of Sorrows, Ba Huang's face was filled with shock and anger. Just as he was about to get up and give chase, he saw the tarot sword light, which Jian Wushuang had used all his strength to slash out, coming toward him. Even he did not dare to underestimate the sharp sword intent. Damn it! Void Master Ba Huang's face darkened. He had no choice but to stop and channel all his void power to block the sword strike. Void technique, Great Ghost Dark Hand. Void Master Ba Huang shouted coldly. His hands turned pitch black and his nails grew sharply, giving off a strong corpse chi. Disperse! Void Master Ba Huang shouted coldly and pushed his hands forward to grab the tarot sword radiance. Bang! Countless sparks flew out from the point where Void Master Ba Huang and the sword met. It was like a man wearing a pair of steel gloves and grabbing a high-speed steel gear. The figure of Void Master Ba Huang was forced back by the sword, and his legs left a long mark in the void. This sword strike! Void Master Ba Huang was extremely shocked and furious. The last move of the tarot sword manual tarot was performed by Jian Wushuang. Although it did not pose a fatal threat to him, it gave him a feeling of being stabbed by needles. This was simply impossible for an intermediate supreme to fight an invincible supreme. I said, disperse! After being pushed back 1,000 feet by the sword, Void Master Ba Huang's eyes widened and he roared angrily. The black light between his hands suddenly became brighter. The next moment, the sword strike was torn apart by Void Master Ba Huang. After tearing the sword strike apart, Void Master Ba Huang panted slightly, and beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. Then he lowered his head and looked at his palms. There was a wound so deep that his bones could be seen, and blood was dripping. Wu Shuang. Void Master Ba Huang's eyes turned cold as he rushed to the entrance of the Land of Sorrows. Snorting coldly, the Void Master Ba Huang released his void consciousness and spread it toward the Land of Sorrows. In just 3 breaths, PFFF, as if he had been hit by a heavy hammer, Void Master Ba Huang bent over and spat out a mouthful of divine blood. His face instantly turned sallow. A land of great calamity! He raised his head to look at the Land of Sorrows, his eyes flashing with deep fear and dread. When he had used his void consciousness to probe this Land of Sorrows, it was as if he had touched an unspeakable existence. In just an instant, his void consciousness had been completely shattered. If he had not reacted quickly enough and cut off his consciousness in time, the indescribable power would have spread to his body through the void consciousness and destroyed him. Wu Shuang, you're seeking your death by entering this land of great calamity. He shook his head and looked at the Land of Sorrows with mixed emotions. Then he took a step forward and turned into a beam of light, leaving the place quickly. In his opinion, Jian Wushuang and the people from the Divine Life Palace would definitely die after entering the Land of Sorrows. There was no need to continue wasting time here. In the Land of Sorrows, Jian Wushuang took back the tarot divine corpse, took a step forward, and immediately rushed forward. It was a long and dark passage. Even though Jian Wushuang was an intermediate supreme master, he could only see darkness and no more than 10 meters ahead. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Jian Wushuang did not dare to release his divine sense, but kept flying forward. He could feel that on both sides of this long and dark passage, there were cold walls. Something seemed to be carved on the uneven walls. Out of careful consideration, Jian Wushuang did not touch it casually. Instead, he kept flying forward. After about the time for 5 incense sticks to burn, Jian Wushuang saw some sparks not far away. It was the flame of the engine when the cosmic boat was traveling. Bang! Bang! Suddenly, Jian Wushuang quickened his pace and caught up with the cosmic boat in 1 step. Then, he took a few steps and landed on the deck of the first cosmic boat. Palace Master? Upon seeing Jian Wushuang's return, Supreme Shui Bo, Lung Rushuang, and the others were delighted. Husband, are you all right? Lung Rushuang held Jian Wushuang's hand and asked with concern. I'm fine. What about you guys? Did you encounter any danger along the way? Jian Wushuang smiled and rubbed Lung Rushuang's nose. Hearing Jian Wushuang say that he was fine, Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Void Master Ba Huang was an invincible supreme expert according to the realm of the divine power universe. Nothing happened to us. We've been moving forward in this tunnel. But it's strange. According to our speed, we should have passed through at least 3 or 4 star fields, but we're still in this tunnel. Leng Rushuang nodded. Jian Wushuang did not say anything but frowned. Indeed, this passageway was a little strange. Palace Master, we're not in the divine power universe right now. Each forbidden zone is a small world on its own, so we can't calculate the distance with regular time, Supreme Shui Bo said with a smile. Although he was slightly weaker than Jian Wushuang in terms of battle strength and cultivation, his years of experience made him more knowledgeable than Jian Wushuang. Is that so? Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and immediately nodded. He stopped thinking and said, "Then let's continue forward." Yes. The fleet of the Divine Life Palace once again sailed forward steadily. However, this journey continued for 3 days and 3 nights. With the cosmic boat's speed, they could have crossed over 100 star fields, but they were still in the dark tunnel. This time, even Supreme Shui Bo frowned as he sensed that something was wrong. However, no one dared to act rashly in this land of sorrows. They could only suppress their emotions and wait quietly for them to arrive. Time continued to drag on. On the deck, Leng Rushuang leaned against Jian Wushuang's shoulder, letting the dark wind in the tunnel blow on their faces. Husband, the entire universe will fall sooner or later. What do you think about Qing'er and the others? What about the Taichu divine world? Leng Rushuang said absent-mindedly. As they advanced through the passage, they were in a rare state of peace. And calmness would often cause one to have many thoughts. This made Leng Rushuang think of many things, such as their children and their old friends who stayed in the Taichu divine world. It'll be fine. The Taichu divine world is far away. The war won't reach there for now. The first step of the void universe will only be to conquer the top powers. Jian Wushuang touched Leng Rushuang's hair and said, "Besides, I've already told them about the situation of the divine power universe through the clone I left in the Taichu divine world. I'm sure they'll have a plan." Yes. Leng Rushuang nodded. Just as the two of them were chatting, a strange and sinister chuckle suddenly came from the dark and narrow passage. This low chuckle was like someone approaching from the dark and chuckling in your ear. In an instant, Jian Wushuang's expression changed and his hair stood on end. He turned around and looked. Who is it? Jian Wushuang suddenly turned his head and looked behind him. Behind him was a pitch-black deck that was empty. Husband, what's wrong? Leng Rushuang held Jian Wushuang's hand and asked in confusion. Jian Wushuang did not reply, but frowned. Just now, he heard a strange low laugh behind his ear. But when he turned around, he saw nothing. Shuanger, did you hear the laughter just now? Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and asked Leng Rushuang. Ah? Laughter. Leng Rushuang was stunned. She shook her head and said, "I didn't. Husband, have you been too tense recently? Is that so?" Jian Wushuang frowned and immediately looked around. But he did not find anything unusual. Could it be that he had heard wrongly? It's possible. Jian Wushuang laughed bitterly and sighed. He had been under too much pressure recently. All right, let's go into the cabin. I'm afraid this passage is a bit strange. Jian Wushuang suggested after some thought. Okay. Leng Rushuang nodded. Giggle. Giggle giggle. Jian Wushuang held Leng Rushuang's hand and was about to turn around and walk to the cabin. The eerie and strange laughter rang in Jian Wushuang's ears again, like the murmurs of the demon ghost. This time, Jian Wushuang heard it clearly. "Stop messing with me." Jian Wushuang's eyes turned cold. With his current super-perception, he might have misheard once because he was too tense, but it was impossible for him to mishear a second time. The next moment, countless blood qi surged and gathered in Jian Wushuang's eyes. In an instant, the divine light in Jian Wushuang's eyes brightened by 3 inches and a purple Chuan character appeared between his eyebrows, which was like a dancing flame. He was expressionless as he swept his gaze across the room. However, the result disappointed him. He still did not see anything. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang's face gradually became serious. He held Lung Rushuang's hand with his left hand and quietly held the hilt of the Tarot Divine sword with his right. Feeling the warmth from the hilt of the Tarot Divine sword, Jian Wushuang felt slightly relieved. He was staring straight ahead and did not notice. In the darkness behind him, a pair of wrinkled and shriveled hands reached out silently and patted his shoulders with trembling hands. Hiss! Instantly, Jian Wushuang's eyes narrowed and he turned around. Behind him, the pale-faced Lung Rushuang was looking at him with a strange smile. Shuang-er! Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows. Wasn't Lung Rushuang beside him? Something's wrong. Jian Wushuang turned his head and saw that Lung Rushuang was looking at Lung Rushuang, who had appeared behind them, in horror. To Lung Rushuang. Are you looking for me? Lung Rushuang looked at Jian Wushuang with a strange smile, and the corners of her mouth slowly opened bigger and bigger. She opened her mouth so wide that the edges reached her ears, revealing a large bloody mouth. She stretched out her hand and grabbed Jian Wushuang's eyes. You're looking for death. Jian Wushuang's eyes turned cold. The Tarot Divine sword, which had been holding the hilt in his right hand, was instantly unsheathed. It turned into a stunning white rainbow and slashed forward fiercely. Before the sword could land, Lung Rushuang's eyes, nose, and mouth began to melt like a candle. In just a few seconds, she had turned into a pool of sticky white liquid on the ground. Giggle, giggle, giggle. The strange voice that seemed to be both laughing and crying gradually faded away. A moment later, the deck of the cosmic boat fell into dead silence again. Jian Wushuang withdrew the Tarot Divine sword and frowned. They had yet to truly enter the land of sorrows, and strange things had already appeared? Husband, what's that? Lung Rushuang asked, still in shock. I don't know. I guess it's a manifestation of the vengeful spirits of this land of sorrows. Jian Wushuang shook his head. Thud, thud, thud. At this moment, the cabin's door opened and Supreme Xue Bo walked in hurriedly. Palace Master, something has happened, Xue Bo said with a heavy expression. What happened? Jian Wushuang's eyes twitched. Palace Master, you'll know when you come. Then, he led Jian Wushuang to the cabin where the disciples of the Divine Life Palace were resting. After a while, Jian Wushuang arrived at the cabin. A disciple of the Divine Life Palace was lying on a bed. Supreme Junfu, Supreme Tianyi, Ninth Culpa King, and the others were standing next to him, all of them looking extremely ugly. Palace Master, Palace Master. Junfu and the others turned around and said when they saw Jian Wushuang walking over. Jian Wushuang nodded at them as a response. Without saying anything, he walked toward the disciple. The disciple of the Divine Life Palace was at the 5th stage ruler realm, and he was currently being bound to the bed by the Supreme Xue Bo's bloodbinding technique. The disciple's pupils dilated and his face was ashen. His expression was indescribably strange. Giggle, giggle, giggle. He did not open his mouth, but a voice that sounded like he was crying and laughing came from his throat. He seemed to be in a daze and did not notice it at all. He only opened his eyes listlessly. It's that laughter again. Jian Wushuang's face turned ugly and he had a bad feeling. Let me see. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and strode forward. Absorb. Jian Wushuang stretched out his finger and touched the disciple's forehead. Just as Jian Wushuang was about to release his divine power to check his body. Bang! The disciple, who had been like a walking corpse and looked like a fool, suddenly reached out and grabbed Jian Wushuang's wrist. You're here? Hurry up and come. I've been waiting for you for a long time. He. A strange sound that seemed to be both crying and laughing came from the disciple's throat. Then, the scene that Jian Wushuang had seen on the deck reappeared. The disciple's body was like a candle that was burning rapidly. Starting from his hair, it melted bit by bit, turning into a pool of sticky white foam. Damn it! Suddenly, Jian Wushuang's face turned extremely gloomy. Strange. It was too strange. He had thought that the land of sorrows would be very dangerous, and he had even prepared himself for a battle, even if he had to die in battle. However, he had never thought that the land of sorrows would be so strange. No matter how strong the danger was, it was not scary. There would always be a way to deal with it. However, the strange phenomenon that appeared in the Land of Sorrows was invisible and untraceable. There was no trace of it at all. The unknown would always be the most difficult to deal with. Where are the other disciples? Are there any abnormalities? Jian Wushuang turned around and looked at Shui Bo and the others with an unsightly expression. Supreme Shui Bo Supreme and the others also had unsightly expressions on their faces. A disciple of the Divine Life Palace had just died in front of their eyes, and they could not even find a trace of the cause, let alone do anything. Within the quiet passageway of the Land of Sorrows, dozens of cosmic boats were cruising forward quietly. In this boundless absolute darkness, even the rumbling sound of the engine was swallowed up. Palace Master, the other disciples have not found anything unusual. The Shui Bo Supreme cupped his hands and replied. Jian Wushuang nodded. Just as he was about to ask Shui Bo to pay more attention, dash! A shrill scream suddenly exploded from the space fleet behind them. In this dark and silent tunnel, this scream was extremely abrupt. Jian Wushuang's expression changed instantly. With a flash of his body, he plunged toward the cosmic boat behind him. Supreme Shui Bo and the others exchanged a glance, and their expressions turned extremely ugly. They hurriedly followed after him. A moment later, in the cabin of the 9th cosmic boat, Jian Wushuang saw the female disciple who had screamed. The female disciple's body was shaking, her shoulders were shaking, and her face was pale. She pointed at the glass window on the universe cabin and said in a frightened tone, Palace Master, there are people outside. Someone's there. Jian Wushuang focused his gaze, but it was dark outside the glass. Jian Wushuang's face darkened. Tell me about the situation just now. Jian Wushuang said expressionlessly. Okay. A look of reminiscence flashed across the female disciple's face as she began to narrate. The matter was simple. Not long ago, this female disciple whose name was Su Yang was sitting cross-legged in the cabin cultivating. When she was cultivating, she encountered a bottleneck, so she wanted to ask the disciples whose cultivation levels were higher than hers and give them some guidance. In the end, she saw a scene that she would never forget for the rest of her life. On the glass window, a livid face was stuck to the window, and its eyes, which were like rotten grapes, were staring straight at her. Because his face was too close, his entire facial features were distorted and terrifying. It was also this face that suddenly appeared that made her so scared that she fell on her butt and screamed. After the female disciple finished speaking, her face still had an expression of shock. I got it. Jian Wushuang's expression was not good. Ghosts playing pranks? They were not ordinary mortals. They were supreme realm experts who stood at the peak of this universe. In their eyes, demons and ghosts were simply insignificant ants. Palace Master Wushuang, please come over for a moment. I have something to tell you. At this moment, Lan Lan, who had been silent the entire time, suddenly spoke. What? Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and followed Lan Lan out of the cabin. The two of them walked to the deck. Jian Wushuang stood with his hands behind his back and said, Miss Lan Lan, if you have anything to say, just say it. Lan Lan nodded and did not continue speaking. Instead, she looked into the distance as if she was reminiscing about something. After a long while, her expression gradually became serious. Jian Wushuang, do you know what our universe was like before it was created? Hearing this, Jian Wushuang was stunned. He really did not know anything about the things that happened before the universe was created. I've heard the details. Jian Wushuang extended his hand and made a gesture of invitation. My master once guessed that our universe is just a reincarnation cycle. Reincarnation? Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows. That's right. Lan Lan let out a deep breath and said, It's reincarnation. According to my master's conjecture, before our civilization was born, there might have been other civilizations in this universe. However, for some unknown reason, this civilization was completely destroyed, and the universe returned to chaos. After another long time, the universe would restart, giving birth to new life and a new civilization. This is our current civilization. Jian Wushuang frowned. What Lan Lan said was not impossible. He believed that the conjectures of Cosmos God were not baseless. My master used to come here to explore the 2 forbidden zones. Unfortunately, he didn't tell us anything about this experience. He would only mention it sometimes. According to my master, there seems to be a body of a supreme being buried in the Imperial Ancestor Ruins Forbidden Zone. Even he can't see through it. This body is even older than our universe. And this land of sorrows, according to what Master mentioned, seems to be the place where the last universe era fell. Jian Wushuang, if the land of sorrows is really the place where the last universe era fell, as my master said, then there must be countless figures from the last universe era who were buried here. Lan Lan had not finished her words. Suddenly, a strange singing voice came from the quiet passage. The god is dead. The devil is destroyed. Everything shall return to nothingness. The heavens crumbled, weeping alone outside the world. This song sounded like the cries of countless gods and demons. It was faint and ethereal. In an instant, Jian Wushuang looked up. However, before Jian Wushuang could use his divine power to see what was going on, he suddenly felt a sense of sorrow. A sense of profound sadness surged in his heart. It was the sorrow of the vicissitudes of life, the despair of all hope, the sorrow of being alone and helpless. It was just a song, but under this sorrowful stubbornness, Jian Wushuang could not help but feel a lump in his throat. Drip. It was the sound of water dripping on the deck. Jian Wushuang turned his head and saw Lan Lan looking up at the starry sky in a daze. He did not know when she had started crying. Miss Lan Lan. Jian Wushuang suppressed the sorrow that wanted to destroy him and tried to call Lan Lan. However, Lan Lan seemed to be in a daze and did not notice at all. Jian Wushuang felt that his face was wet. He reached out to wipe it and found that his face was also covered with tears. He could feel that this sorrow seemed to have transformed into a pair of large hands that clutched his neck tightly, trying to drag him into a place of eternal damnation. Stop messing with me. Jian Wushuang bit the tip of his tongue tightly. In an instant, the slight pain from the tip of his tongue made him slightly more awake. Enduring the discomfort, Jian Wushuang stepped into the cabin. Everyone in the cabin, including Supreme Shuebo, Supreme Junfu, Ninth Culpa King, the ordinary disciples, and even Lang Rushuang, stood in the cabin in a daze. Damn it! Jian Wushuang clenched his fists. Then he could no longer resist the sadness. His vision turned black as if he had fallen into a boundless abyss. The long and quiet passage in the land of sorrows returned to a dead silence. Only the singing that sounded like the weeping of gods and demons and the low chuckling of a voice could be heard. It sounded strange and eerie. The mist mixed with black and gray threads scattered on Jian Wushuang's face along with the wind. That invisible yet tangible feeling made him realize his current situation. The cosmic boat, which had been traveling across the starry sky, had disappeared. Even all the disciples in the Divine Life Palace had disappeared. The strong uneasiness in his heart prompted Jian Wushuang to open his eyes, and what he saw was the extreme darkness of the long wind. It was as if the darkness that had existed since ancient times had covered everything. Even when Jian Wushuang used his divine powers, he could only see a few feet away. What is this place? Could it be that I've already arrived at the land of sorrows? Jian Wushuang murmured. However, he remembered clearly that he had been in the cosmic boat a moment ago, but now he was in this strange and mysterious world. After thinking for a moment, he picked up a handful of sand from the ground. Through the golden light in his eyes, he saw that the sand was not black, but a rough white material shrouded in a layer of golden halo. Swish swish. The long sound of the morning bell and evening drum seemed to pass through the time of 10,000 worlds and came from the distant past. In such a strange environment, Jian Wushuang was shocked. He quickly lowered his body and looked into the distance. In the next moment, the chaotic darkness slowly drifted up like clear air. At the same time, as the darkness receded, nearly 100 suns rose at the same time. Even Jian Wushuang, who had created a holy kingdom with a wave of his hand, was shocked by the scene. There was no other reason, it was because the scene was too shocking. At this moment, These slowly rising suns were nearly 100 times larger than the suns in any part of the universe. At the same time, these suns were no longer pure red, but gave off a purple-red light. The sky and earth were dyed a terrifying purple-red color by the 100 suns. As the extreme darkness retreated, the long sounds of the morning bell and evening drum became more frequent, like the sound of war drums. The sorrow was even more heart-wrenching in this desolate star field. Jian Wushuang did not act rashly due to the strange phenomenon in front of him. He had already guessed that this was the land of sorrows. He was waiting quietly. His subconscious intuition told him that everything here was only the beginning. Time had long lost its value here. As the 100 grand suns rose into the sky, the desolate land of sorrows suddenly began to shine with countless rays of divine power. Primordial divine power instantly filled the earth, followed by extremely pure and rich golden and red divine blood that rained down. Jian Wushuang, who was fully focused, did not expect such a thing. He was immediately hit by countless drops of divine blood. Along with the divine blood, there were countless giant broken limbs, surrounded by ancient divine rhythmical aura. The broken armors engraved with ancient ciphertexts were covered in divine blood, and the broken divine weapons were uncountable. The more Jian Wushuang looked at it, the more shocked he became. At the same time, he could roughly guess the true meaning of the desolate land of sorrows. When the vast land was filled with broken divine weapons and corpses, the entire land of sorrows became a god burial ground. The cries of the gods and devils resounded, as if the heavens and earth were singing a sad song. Jian Wushuang's state of mind seemed to have resonated with everything in the god burial ground, and he started to throb uncontrollably. Why did all the supreme gods, who had the power to intimidate the primordial era, die here? I don't understand. Jian Wushuang shook his head hard, and he began to realize that his divine sense was affected. However, an even more unbelievable scene appeared. The divine corpse on the ground disappeared in the blink of an eye like clouds and smoke. In its place was a vast amount of divine power that came from Wu Yan's distance. Before the divine power could solidify, the sky was the first to collapse and crack. The suns that were hanging high in the sky suddenly grew purple feathers and turned into three-legged purple crows that could cover the sky. Countless divine powers transformed into unparalleled terrifying existences that either rode the wind and clouds, or 3 to 5 chariots that rushed toward the vast battlefield. The sky was torn into pieces by their divine power. This ancient battlefield could not withstand the existence of such an unimaginable giant. Just the majestic divine power that they exuded had constructed the most extreme collision that belonged to that era. Heaven and earth were shaking, and the sound seemed to have been fixed. Jian Wushuang was shocked. Existences at the level of cosmos gods were the most ordinary in the land of sorrows. He could not imagine why a god who had reached that level would risk the shattering of his divine aura to start this ultimate battle. In the chaotic sky, hundreds of three-legged purple crows swayed their black-purple tail feathers and shot down destructive purple-red flames. Each flame could easily tear apart the nomological Great Tao, leaving behind a brutal aura. There were no sounds of killing. The ultimate battle had begun. The unimaginable divine power, even a trace of it, was enough to severely injure Snake God in the Void Universe. Even invincible supremes would not be able to survive for a second in this place. The divine weapons clashed, and the ancient peak existences used the purest form of their bodies to control the divine weapons to kill their opponents. The dazzling divine light filled every corner. An unparalleled existence shot down the three-legged purple crow in the sky with a longbow and threw the corpse of the purple crow god at the enemy, causing the purest explosion. There was an unbeatable existence wielding the formless divine sword that fought to the last moment and perished together. Another unparalleled existence was dying and laughing before the great Tao disappeared. On the battlefield, a chaotic collision was going on. The mournful song that sounded like a sea demon's song exploded in Jian Wushuang's divine sense. He was not affected by it, but he felt as if he was in it. He wanted to close his eyes, but his pupils were enlarging bit by bit. Lunatics, lunatics, they're all lunatics. What's wrong with all these reincarnations? Even the top cultivators can't escape from the heavenly Tao. Jian Wushuang's eyes almost popped out of their sockets as divine blood gushed out from every pore of his body. Then, do the Taos in the world belong to the path of longevity or the path of killing? I don't understand. The extremely painful thoughts could not help but spread. The great Tao of faith that he had been building in his heart started to collapse uncontrollably. Are we all puppets? If that's the case, what's the point of everything? Can we change the final result? It's just a change of way to die. His golden eyes, which had never been tired or destroyed, started to turn slightly dull. I want to sleep for a while. As the ultimate battle in the sky began to come to an end, all the supreme existences were annihilated. Jian Wushuang also lowered his eyes slowly. The heavens cried, the rules were broken, and the great Tao returned to its original state. What is the meaning of pursuing the Tao for 1,000 years, proving the Tao for 10,000 years, and comprehending the Tao for 1,000,000 years? It was like the sound of a clear spring, and all things were reborn. A voice entered his ears. Little guy, wake up. The elegy in his ears gradually dissipated and was replaced by a slightly friendly call. The call seemed to have some magical power that pulled Jian Wushuang, who was on the verge of death, back from his fallen divine consciousness. He unwillingly opened his eyes and saw a thin face. He sobered up in an instant, and his subconscious reaction made him move back a few feet. He looked at the old man in plain white with vigilance. The thin old man did not blame Jian Wushuang for his rudeness. He stood up with a smile and introduced himself. Hello, little guy. My name is Shi Ting. Without any carelessness, Jian Wushuang thought for a moment and said, Greetings, old sir. To be able to appear here and not be from the Divine Life Palace. These two factors alone were enough to make Jian Wushuang raise his vigilance to the highest level. At the same time, he began to suspect whether the ultimate battle that had just occurred was the doing of the old man in front of him. The old man who called himself Shi Ting smiled and waved his hand. It's fate that we've met here. There's no need to be so formal. Jian Wushuang was unmoved. After seeing the surrounding scene, he was dazed for a moment. Countless broken bones were either buried or exposed on the ground. The broken divine weapons and blood-stained armor were mostly buried by the sand and stones. Even though the great Taos had been gone for hundreds of millions of years, the unparalleled pure divine power still protected their masters, just like before. The scene in front of him was exactly the same as what he had seen before. However, all the almighty existences had fallen. Is this the true land of sorrows? Jian Wushuang asked himself, not knowing how to express his inner thoughts. Shi Ting smiled, and in his not-so-clear eyes, the scene of the earth was reflected. You call it the land of sorrows, but in my heart, it is the God burial ground. They've all left. Shi Ting's words were relaxed, but at the end, he revealed a sense of melancholy and loneliness. Jian Wushuang was stunned, and he looked at Shi Ting with a strange expression. From his words, it was not difficult to tell that Shi Ting, who looked like an old man, seemed to have gone through that era and lived until now. However, ever since he had seen that scene, Jian Wushuang could not believe that there was an unparalleled existence that could survive the ultimate battle. As if he could sense what Jian Wushuang was thinking, Shi Ting came back to his senses and said, I am willing to wait here to find the fated person who was meant to come here. Shi Ting did not wait for him to speak and asked again, Little guy, why did you come to this place? Jian Wushuang felt a little embarrassed. The divine power universe had fallen. As the new palace master of the Divine Life Palace, after careful calculation, he was ready to come to the land of sorrows to recuperate. However, he did not know how to say these words. Shi Ting did not seem to have any ill intentions, but if he did not want them to stay, he would probably be able to suppress them or drive them out easily. Jian Wushuang did not dare to take the risk of speaking rashly. In this short stalemate, Jian Wushuang suddenly realized that the 3 cosmic boats that carried the entire Divine Life Palace did not seem to have followed him to this land of sorrows. His heart trembled. The tens of thousands of disciples of the Divine Life Palace were the last hope of the divine power universe. If they were to suffer any losses, it would be a disaster for the divine power universe. And no, that won't happen. Jian Wushuang immediately turned around to look for the whereabouts of the cosmic boat. Shi Ting stopped him. Little guy, are these the things you were looking for? As he finished his sentence, Shi Ting waved his hand and the dark sky rippled like water. Immediately after, the space opened up, and the cosmic boats, which could hold its own against a star, slowly sailed out of the crack. However, the dead silence on the deck had indeed made Jian Wushuang nervous. He was well aware of how fearsome the dark passageway leading to the land of sorrows was. Even Supreme Shui Bo and the others had been bewitched. Those with weaker spiritual senses might have died on the spot. Jian Wushuang did not have time to greet Shi Ting and jumped onto the deck. He was relieved to see what was happening. Supreme Shui Bo and the others were leaning against the boat, unconscious. From their long breaths, they were not in any life-threatening danger. Their cultivation realms are too weak. If they enter this god burial ground, their realms will be affected at the very least. If they get lost, they will become the nourishment of this god burial ground. As a last resort, I made them fall into a deep sleep to avoid many restrictions. A straight and thin figure was standing behind Jian Wushuang. After hearing the explanation, Jian Wushuang did not hesitate. He turned around, cupped his hands and said solemnly, "Thank you for your help, old sir. I am grateful." Shi Ting laughed and waved his hand. "Don't thank me yet. Although I helped to protect you, those with low-level consciousness might not be able to escape." Jian Wushuang's heart sank. He hurriedly activated his divine skill to wake everyone up. However, he thought that it would be difficult to wake them up with his own divine skill, so he immediately activated the origin blood in his body to test them. As expected, with the origin blood, people ST-rated to wake up. Shuebo, Junfu, Lan, and Lung Rushuang were the first to wake up. "Greetings, Palace Master Wushuang." When Supreme Shuebo and the others saw Jian Wushuang, they immediately knelt down and paid their respects. "Everyone, there's no need to use those overly elaborate formalities." Jian Wushuang withdrew his hand and motioned for them to stand up. Supreme Shuebo shook his head, and 2 streams of tears suddenly gushed out of his eyes. "I thought that we could only die in that dark passage. I didn't expect that we would arrive at this land of sorrows safely. It seems that the heavenly Tao doesn't stop at the divine power universe and my divine life palace. My husband." Lung Rushuang could not help but throw herself into Jian Wushuang's arms and sob. "I thought I would never see you again." Jian Wushuang caressed the beautiful hair of the fairy in his arms and said in a low voice, "I promise you that even if I die, I will see you again." Most of the Divine Palace's disciples in the first cosmic boat had woken up, and they all revealed the joy of surviving a disaster. Only Lan, who was standing beside Supreme Shuebo, turned to look at the straight and thin figure behind Jian Wushuang after calming down. "Now is not the time to console. I need to count all the disciples and deal with what's going to happen next," Jian Wushuang said. Lung Rushuang nodded and left his arms. After exchanging a glance with Shuebo and the others, Jian Wushuang leaped and glided toward the other 2 cosmic boats. A moment later, Jian Wushuang used his origin blood to wake up the disciples in the other 2 cosmic boats. There were a total of 14,600 disciples who had headed to the land of sorrows this time. In the end, close to 3,000 of them would remain in the dark passageway forever. The rest of the disciples who were at a lower cultivation realm were also more or less affected. These were the last remnants of the next generation, who were preserved by the divine power universe, but so many of them had died just by entering the land of sorrows. This made their hearts sink. He did not know if it was because he was depressed or because he had lost too much origin blood essence, but when he fell from the cosmic boat, Jian Wushuang fell straight to the ground. "Palace Master Wushuang." Supreme Shuebo and the others hurriedly lifted Jian Wushuang up. Then, Supreme Shuebo activated his divine ability and enveloped him with divine power, slowly soothing his meridians. "I'm fine." Jian Wushuang's expression recovered. He waved his hand and stood up straight. He then looked at Shi Ting and walked over slowly. Jian Wushuang cupped his hands solemnly and said in a deep voice, "I, Jian Wushuang, the palace master of the Divine Life Palace, would like to plead with you to let us live in this desolate place. The universe is so big that there's no other place for us to stay. After saying this, Jian Wushuang's body trembled slightly as if all his strength had been drained. Cosmos God used his body to seal void gods, and Supreme Gai Fu exterminated his divine soul, turning his body into a sky-soaring attack to block the void universe outside. Feng Tian Patriarch burned his life source to form a wall, seeking a way out for the people of the divine power universe. Everything these ancient elders had done was to preserve the last flame of the divine power universe. The current scene and the past all came to his mind, making Jian Wushuang even more sorrowful. Of course. Shi Ting's face slowly revealed a smile. I have been in this god burial ground for God knows how many years. With someone to accompany me, I will not feel bored. As if the clouds had parted and the moon had brightened, Jian Wushuang felt that the sorrow in his heart had been reduced. He cupped his hands in excitement and said, Thank you, old sir. We are very grateful. Supreme Shui Bo and the others were also extremely excited. They looked at each other, and the pressure on them lessened significantly. No one dared to approach this sorrowful place, and in the end, the last of the universe's next generation entered it, and the heavenly Tao was not destroyed. In the land of sorrows, which was full of bones and corpses of the gods, the vast divine power was still as agile as its master when he was alive. Each divine corpse was an independent existence. From time to time, there would be divine power that would transform into all things and rise up, releasing its last breath without tiring. The divine power that had existed since the primordial era was so vast that even the Supreme's experts like Shui Bo, Tianyi, and Jun Fu found it difficult to walk, let alone the nearly 10,000 disciples of the Divine Life Palace who were far weaker than Supremes. With every step they took, just the ownerless divine power that was derived was enough to cause the meridians of every disciple to burst. When they took their 100th step, nearly 3,000 disciples of the Divine Life Palace fell to the ground at the same time. Why can't I move anymore? The 3,000 disciples who had fallen to the ground began to exchange questions. What's going on? Jian Wushuang was the first to notice the strange situation behind him. He was stunned at first, then he seemed to realize something and said with great joy, The disciples who are kneeling on the ground, listen up. From now on, you will immediately comprehend on the spot and absorb any divine power that enters the body. You must not disobey the order. From now on, no matter for 1,000 years or 10,000 years, you must guard your mind and concentrate on cultivating. By the palace master's orders. The 3,000 disciples shouted in unison and immediately stood still on the spot, each cultivating on their own. Brilliant light shot into the sky, and there was some momentum. The heavens have not destroyed my divine power universe. Supreme Shui Bo's eyes were slightly red as he sighed. Little fellow, your comprehension is really not bad. Shi Ting smiled and moved forward. Jian Wushuang could not suppress the joy on his face. He realized that this land of sorrows would be the last opportunity for the entire divine power universe to fight against the void universe again. After that, every 100 steps, 2,000 disciples could no longer hold on and sat down. The further they went, the purer and more abundant the ownerless divine power that was derived. The huge divine corpses stacked up and each of them had their divine power soaring into the sky and splitting the space apart. At the same time, there were mottled cracks that looked like mysterious runes that occasionally lingered on one of the divine corpses. Jian Wushuang could vaguely recognize that it was the aura of Tao vindication, but it had long been broken. Even so, even someone as powerful as Supreme Shui Bo was extremely envious. One must know that this was the Tao vindication of an even more terrifying, unparalleled existence. Even if he could only comprehend a part of it, it would definitely be more effective than wasting hundreds of thousands of eras. As time stopped, more and more disciples of the Divine Life Palace sat down to comprehend the Tao. When Jian Wushuang heard Lan Lan's voice and looked back, only Shui Bo, 9th Culpa King, and less than 100 people were left behind. His wife, Lang Rushuang, was also sitting down to comprehend the Tao. Palace Master Wushuang. Lan Lan was standing not far behind her, sweat dripping from her cheeks. The pressure of divine power had stopped her in her tracks. "I'll be meditating here for now, so I'll bid you farewell." Lan Lan cupped her hands and smiled. Then, she slowly sat down. "I hope that after we part today, we will be able to see each other in the future. Take care. Take care." The two of them solemnly said goodbye. Lan Lan's hesitant look lingered in Jian Wushuang's mind for a moment. Then Jian Wushuang continued to lead Shui Bo and the others forward. A majestic divine power shot into the sky, and it seemed to be mixed with auspicious cries and flowing treasure light. Undamaged divine weapons began to appear, and divine blood that had been condensed for hundreds of millions of years flowed like crystals. At the same time, the pressure of more and more vast divine power became stronger. After Ninth Kulpa King walked nearly 100 steps, he stopped to comprehend the Tao. Next was Supreme Tianyi, followed by Supreme Junfu. Only Jian Wushuang walked among them like a dragon swimming in the sea. Not only did he not feel the terrifying pressure, but the more he walked, the more he felt like he was walking on flat ground. "Palace Master Wushuang, this old man will also stop here." Supreme Shui Bo stopped in his tracks, and his eyes seemed to be burning with flames. "Palace Master Wushuang is the divine messenger, and the heavenly Tao is looking down on you. Even this old man can't compare to you. At this point, I can no longer accompany you, Palace Master. I hope that Palace Master can forgive me." Jian Wushuang did not say much. He held Supreme Shui Bo's arms and said sincerely, "I'll wait here for you, Supreme Shui Bo. No matter if it takes 10,000 years or 100,000 years. I'll remember my duty and try my best to break through. In addition, Supreme Shui Bo, you can also try to break through. You should know that there's no end to the realms. Only those above the supreme level can vindicate your Tao." These few words seemed to have broken through Supreme Shui Bo's shackles, causing him to tremble. Jian Wushuang did not say anything more. He smiled and followed Ting. The twilight bell between heaven and earth rang, and countless broken great Taos flowed through the ancient times, shining on each other. With only a corner of it, one could see the glory and magnificence of their masters. It was unknown whether the heavens and earth had reincarnated or not, but from the Supremes to the peddlers, they had all worked hard to prove themselves in the same galaxy, lake, and sea. At this moment, there were only two figures walking slowly in the vast divine power of heaven and earth. One of them was a young man with a straight body, like a sharp sword waiting to be unsheathed. The edge of the sword was already sharp enough. The other old man in white was also thin and straight, like a blunt sword that had lost its edge and hidden its light. There was a broken great Tao circulating around him, a divine weapon hidden in the earth waiting to be found, and the vast divine power of the Overlord filling every inch of space. However, Jian Wushuang was not envious at all. He followed Ting calmly and firmly. From time to time, there were undamaged and powerful great Tao fragments that wanted to get close to Jian Wushuang, but they were flicked away by Ting. "Where are they going?" Jian Wushuang said to himself and started to look around. Time had no value here, and everything seemed to have stopped at the moment when it died hundreds of millions of years ago. "Why did you all come here?" Ting, who was one step ahead of Jian Wushuang, turned around and asked. Jian Wushuang was silent. After a while, he talked about the battle of catastrophe that happened between the two universes. When Jian Wushuang mentioned that the divine power universe had already fallen, he lost the mood to continue. After listening to his story, Ting did not say much but only let out a small sigh. Jian Wushuang did not feel too sad anymore. He had long understood that he could only protect everything he wanted to protect by breaking through to the peak endlessly. Right now, it was a great fortune. Jian Wushuang did not dare to relax as it concerned everything about the divine power universe. "Before I die, I want to have a clear conscience for everything I've done." Jian Wushuang swore in his heart and his eyes became even more passionate. In the following journey, even Jian Wushuang, who had a strong mental state, began to feel anxious. To be able to comprehend for a day in such a vast divine power was something that the previous him dared not imagine. However, Ting showed no signs of stopping, and this made Jian Wushuang's state of mind waver. As if he could read his mind, Ting's voice sounded in his ears. "Are you getting impatient?" Jian Wushuang was embarrassed and said awkwardly, "I'm ashamed." Everything changed in Jian Wushuang's eyes. The ownerless divine power rose up with the wind, sweeping up the thousands of divine weapons on the ground and shooting into the sky. There were billions of divine rays connected between them. The extremely bright and vast divine power directly destroyed the entire chaotic cloud layer. Countless divine weapons from all directions seemed to have reopened their divine senses and were running freely in the sky. In the next moment, like a dragon, the divine soldiers fell to the ground like fallen stars. Clang! Clang! The unparalleled divine power bloomed like a lotus flower and swept toward the ground. Jian Wushuang was shocked. If he was hit by the sweeping divine power, even a top supreme martial artist would not be able to hold on for one breath, let alone him. However, the scene that he had expected did not happen. Ting stood there like a heavy sword. With a gentle wave of one hand, it was as if a curtain was lifted. The vast divine power that swept across the ground suddenly rose and rushed into the sky like a huge sea. Rumble! Rumble! When the supreme divine power collided with the sky, it was like the most beautiful picture scroll. The divine power dissipated on its own and turned into stars that slowly fell under the heaven and earth. The auras of holiness, antiquity, and chaos were all revealed at this moment. It was a divine rhythm that was mixed with the aura of the peak of the ancient era. Jian Wushuang stood at the same place and held back the shock in his heart as he reached out to catch the falling brilliance. When the light entered the water, it only touched the skin and naturally integrated into the meridians. "This is the aura of the great Tao." Jian Wushuang was completely shocked. In the raindrop-like brilliance, every trace of it carried a different aura of the great Tao. "Follow me." Ting smiled and stepped into the path that was formed by divine weapons. Jian Wushuang suppressed the fire in his heart and stepped onto the creation Tao. It was only the first step, but his foot was pierced by a powerful divine spear. The divine blood dripped down the tip of the spear. However, Jian Wushuang's body only trembled slightly, and he continued to move forward firmly. With every step he took, the sharp divine weapon easily tore through every inch of his skin. Bright divine blood gushed out from his feet and calves. However, Jian Wushuang did not seem to feel it. He continued to move forward without stopping. He was like the most devout and determined worshipper, moving forward step by step. Behind him, a layer of glistening divine blood was left on the great Tao formed by divine power. Jian Wushuang was holding on. The divine weapon that could even cut his soul had left deep marks on his feet and calves. The pain on his body was far less than 1/10,000th of the pain of his soul being cut. The flesh on the soles of his feet was cut, and the deepest part of his bones was exposed. Jian Wushuang's firm state of mind began to waver. Ting was right in front of him, but he felt that it was so far away. "I can't help but persist. For those seniors who had already died, I can live. They sacrificed for it. Even if I die, I will die on the battlefield." Jian Wushuang felt that his mind was clear and the pain of his divine soul being cut seemed to have reduced. "I told Supreme Shui Bo that I would risk my life to make a breakthrough. That was an oath I made to others as well as myself." He seemed to be in extreme pain, and his pale face actually squeezed out a smile. An even more unbelievable scene appeared. Jian Wushuang began to let go of his legs, and from moving, he started to run. On the great Tao that was blooming with divine power like a lotus flower, a thin but firm figure was running forward. After an unknown period of time, the light in the sky dissipated and the sky returned to chaos. There was only one bright and vast great Tao that remained in this land of sorrows. All kinds of terrifying divine power were like huge pillars that supported this unknown land of sorrows. The derived divine power seemed to be attracted by some kind of power and was no longer rejected. Instead, it was divided into thousands of threads and poured into places that needed them. When a pair of feet that no longer had any skin and flesh stuck to them stepped on the end of the undying great Tao, even Ting, who had been waiting for a long time, could not help but look sideways. The lower hem of his robe was completely torn, and his divine blood seemed to have been completely drained. The foot at the end of the robe was already white bone. Only his eyes, which were like the eternal stars, moved Shurting. Shurting said, "I can feel that there is a stronger power in your body. Why don't you release it to help you move forward?" Jian Wushuang did not say anything but shook his head slowly. Then, he could not hold on any longer and fell to the ground. He did not know if it was a dream or an illusion. The great Tao comprehension that the cosmos god had left in Jian Wushuang's divine consciousness was opened by him. However, at the moment it was opened, he suddenly woke up. "You're awake, little guy." Shurting stood on the Taoist sanctum that was made of divine power and looked at Jian Wushuang with relief. Jian Wushuang propped himself up with one hand and stood up instantly. "What is this place?" Jian Wushuang looked at the huge square that was completely made of vast divine power, and he had not reacted yet. "This is the place you should be comprehending." Shurting laughed. Jian Wushuang did not lack comprehension. With just a hint, he instantly realized that the Taoist right temple was built by the divine weapons left by the unparalleled warriors. "Thank you, old sir." Jian Wushuang cupped his fists and looked at Shurting with even more admiration. Shurting clapped his hands and said, "This is the place that is most suitable for you. However, your final cultivation will depend on your own fate." "Yes." Jian Wushuang agreed and was about to sit cross-legged to cultivate when he was stopped by Shurting. "Little guy, this kind of cultivation method will have little effect on you," Shurting said as he raised his right hand. Suddenly, the Tarot Divine sword that was hanging behind Jian Wushuang's back soared into the sky and hovered above his head, as if it had a mind of its own. The path of cultivation is to constantly search for the Tao and the process of Tao vindication. You've already vaguely touched that level, so I'll give you a trace of enlightenment. Shurting's words were clear, but they were like hammers that smashed into Jian Wushuang's mind. Before chaos was formed, when heaven and earth were still one, chaos was the Tao. The chaos turns into clear and turbid qis, and these two qis are two streaks. When the great era begins, the number of Taos will increase. Tao appears to have no limits, but it has limits. Some people can pry into the profoundness within and prove themselves, while some people can't touch that layer of meaning in their entire lives. Little guy, although you already have a complete Tao, it's not yours. But with your current realm, it's rare for you to understand the meaning. All I can do now is to let you guard the Tao in your heart and stabilize your state of mind. Shurting did not care about Jian Wushuang's arrogance. He said slowly, "Unparalleled existence." Boom! It was as if a thunderbolt had exploded in his divine sense. Jian Wushuang could no longer remain calm. He directly stretched out his hand and the Tarot Divine sword appeared in his hand. Divine power surged out uncontrollably. Holding the Tarot Divine sword, Jian Wushuang was like an unsheathed sharp sword, revealing its sharp edge. "Not bad, the divine power is sharp. It seems that you have some understanding of the sword." Shurting seemed to be satisfied. Jian Wushuang thought for a while and then said firmly, "Sir, I think I have roughly understood the concept in my heart. I am determined to enter the Tao with the sword." Shurting nodded and signaled Jian Wushuang to make his move. In this vast and majestic divine power dojo, the divine power that he had used up could be replenished almost instantly. Therefore, Jian Wushuang no longer held back and directly activated Chaos Overlord body. The purple color of the Chuan character between his eyebrows exuded. Eternal Night. Jian Wushuang directly performed the first move of the Tarot Sword Manual. Blazing black gas gushed out from the sword and transformed into a black ball that swept toward Shurting. With the support of the vast divine power, the momentum and power of the first move of the sword code were several times stronger than the previous ones. Just as the black ball was about to hit Shurting, the space around it paused. Then, the black ball split into two from the center and dissipated into black smoke. Jian Wushuang was not surprised by the situation and directly used the third move of the sword code, Dusk. At that moment, with Shurting as the center, the pit that should have collapsed did not appear. Instead, a huge repulsive force hit Jian Wushuang and sent him flying. After retreating for dozens of feet, Jian Wushuang stabbed his sword into the ground to stop his retreating figure. His qi and blood were boiling violently. He swallowed the blood in his throat and slowly got up. The sword manual's dusk did not affect Ting at all. Instead, the damage that was rejected was reflected back to Jian Wushuang, which made him extremely depressed. And Ting stood at the same spot from start to finish, not even moving a step. Looking at his calm appearance, he probably did not even use much strength. Jian Wushuang adjusted his state of mind, took a deep breath, and quietly induced the fourth move. 4 seasons. A silent cold light emerged from Jian Wushuang's feet. With the support of the vast divine power of the dojo, it swept through the entire dojo almost instantly. Under this move, even the divine power that supported the operation of the Taoist sanctum paused for a moment. Now's the time. Jian Wushuang suddenly jumped and poured all his divine power into the tarot divine sword. He slashed down from the sky and attacked Ting. The slash that could easily tear the universe apart only left a faint white mark in the air of the land of sorrows. When the sword mark reached Ting, it was only an inch long. Ting stretched out his index and middle fingers and pinched the sword mark, causing it to be destroyed. After the attack stopped, Jian Wushuang did not stop. He stepped on the ground and ran toward Ting. In an instant, a carefree tarot divine corpse appeared behind Jian Wushuang. All the previous moves were in service of this moment. The huge figure was like a mountain, and it pressed down with Jian Wushuang's sword. Whiz, a slight collision sound was heard, and time seemed to have stopped. The shadow of Supreme Tarot had yet to retreat, and Jian Wushuang was still suspended in the air. The long sword in his hand was only 1 palm away from Ting, but it could not move an inch further. Ting was still standing at the same place. He raised his right palm above his head, as if he was holding a sword to block Jian Wushuang's most powerful attack. The person who created this set of sword techniques was quite experienced. If he were to improve one more step, it would be considered to be truly perfect. Ting said softly, as if he was feeling sorry, and pushed his right hand up slightly. In an instant, like a receding tide, Jian Wushuang was sent flying. Ting's attack seemed to be as light as the wind, but when it actually landed on his body, it almost made him lose the ability to resist. After landing on the ground, Jian Wushuang directly spat out a large mouthful of divine blood. The tarot divine sword, which had never left his hand, was also nailed to the side. An unprecedented sense of powerlessness overwhelmed him. The last time he felt this powerlessness was when he was Void God, who had broken through the universe to kill him. Ting walked slowly toward Jian Wushuang with his hands behind his back. Who wrote the sword techniques you are using? Jian Wushuang stood up slowly with the help of the tarot divine sword. He's a genius senior from my divine power universe. To be able to comprehend this sword technique, he must be a heaven's favorite. But why doesn't he improve this sword technique? That's because the senior who created the sword code has already died, Jian Wushuang said dejectedly. Ting nodded. I see. But it's a blessing that this sword manual was passed down. Before Jian Wushuang could speak, Ting continued. The chaos was separated and the universe was born. Although there are thousands of sword principles, is there really a sword principle that is connected to your mind? Jian Wushuang was stunned. Apparently, he was also thinking about the same question. He originally wanted to blurt out the tarot sword manual, but in the end, he didn't. That's right, the tarot sword manual could easily split the universe. But was it really in line with his heart? Even if the inheritance was not destroyed in his hands, even if he could display the power of the tarot sword manual, it was still the sword Tao of Supreme Tarot. Ting said, You have to be clear about every word I said. Your understanding of the sword Tao is far beyond your imagination. But even if you can understand every sword Tao and integrate them, they will still not be yours. Each sword Tao will only belong to their creator. From the moment you started cultivating the tarot sword manual, a tiny sword mark was left in your heart. This sword mark is the barrier. What you need to do now is to find your own sword Tao. At the same time, he waved his right hand in the air. The invisible but tangible fluctuations made Jian Wushuang cast a sidelong glance. Although Shi Ting's hand was empty, the sharp and invisible aura made Jian Wushuang understand. It was an invisible sword, a sword Dao that belonged to Shi Ting. Jian Wushuang was overwhelmed with emotions. He immediately placed the tarot divine sword to one side and started to comprehend the concept that was gradually taking shape in his heart as time stopped. There was no brilliant sword essence, only the purest form and move. I've always been searching for my own sword Dao, but it's always fleeting. I'm also afraid that the sword Dao I've comprehended will be incomplete, so I've put it aside until now. Now I will no longer run away. Even if the sword manual becomes incomplete because of this, I will not regret it. Jian Wushuang suddenly opened his eyes and a golden light radiated from his eyes. Divine patterns started to gather around his palm that had been rising with the wind. Frame by frame, his extremely slow movements seemed to be analyzing the sword intent in his mind. Complicated and extremely mysterious divine patterns started to appear around Jian Wushuang. Shi Ting had already left Jian Wushuang and was looking at him from afar. Integrate with all things in the world, and stay outside, using the sword to enter the Tao, with the shapeless body of the sword, divine power as the hilt, the long wind as the blade, and divine glyphs as the center. An extremely strange but reckless long sword appeared. This was the manifestation of Jian Wushuang's sword principle. A boundless sword intent that was different but stronger than before soared into the sky. Even though he had once held the tarot divine sword and released the power to split the sky, he had never released such endless pressure as he was now. His long hair was untied and danced wildly behind his back. His pale golden eyes emitted a crystal-like brilliance, as if a god had descended and emitted endless divine might. For the first time, the divine power floating around the training hall became restless. The ownerless divine power that was derived seemed to have sensed the sword essence that was in the process of being nurtured. It attacked crazily from all directions, trying to merge with it. Shi Ting waved his hand to create a barrier outside the dojo, blocking the worship of the ownerless divine power. The long sword with golden patterns was raised above his head. At that moment, Jian Wushuang seemed to have turned into a sword, and a hazy treasure image occupied half of the Taoist sanctum. I have a sword move. Today, I'd like to invite old Sir to take a look. A deep roar came from his chest, and the manifestation sword intent in his hand slashed down. The phantom form also fell. The sacred and ritualistic stroke was a sword principle that only belonged to him. The endless golden runes expanded and bloomed along with the power of the sword. Swish! In the next moment, the Taoist sanctum built with divine power trembled, and the sword will that took form slashed down. The almost indestructible training hall was instantly torn into a long mark like a natural chasm, and the remaining training halls quickly fell apart. Shi Ting stood at the center of the sword intent, and the divine power barrier he created was almost immediately swallowed. When the entire training hall was torn in half by the heavenly chasm, the divine gold pattern that had already disappeared suddenly transformed into a pillar of light that shot up into the sky from the bottom of the training hall, eventually devouring the entire training hall. The most magnificent and sacred explosion lasted for a full 10 breaths before it finally ended with the fall of a figure. The light of the divine power spread, and the Taoist sanctum that had been destroyed by such an unparalleled attack slowly appeared. Countless divine power turned into threads that lifted Jian Wushuang up. The destroyed dojo was scattered everywhere like stars. The thousands of divine weapons below the Taoist sanctum trembled at the same time, as if they could no longer suppress their divine might. Lying on the divine power, Jian Wushuang gasped for breath. Although the divine power that had been depleted was instantly replenished, the pain that went straight to the divine soul still dazzled Jian Wushuang. Just the power of this move had almost sucked him dry. If he used it in the universe where his divine power could not be replenished quickly, it would be a moment of life and death. Shi Ting's figure reappeared, and he stood on a fragment as he drove toward Jian Wushuang. "Is this your sword, Dao?" Shi Ting asked. Jian Wushuang was stunned. Then he said proudly, "This is my Dao." Shi Ting's face started to reveal a smile, and he said, "Astounding. Thank you for your guidance, old sir." Jian Wushuang cupped his hands and said with joy. Shi Ting laughed. My advice is not of much use. Everything is based on your own thoughts and understanding. Jian Wushuang shook his head. It's precisely because of your teachings that I dared to take that step. Otherwise, I'm afraid I'll never be able to move forward. Shi Ting nodded. Jian Wushuang's brilliant stroke was a brilliant stroke that he had fully comprehended his own sword Dao. From now on, he would definitely be more and more integrated with his own great Dao. Do you know what the extreme realm of the sword Dao is? Shi Ting sent the last question. Jian Wushuang pondered for a moment and then said with some uncertainty, Man and sword as one? Turn invisible? A hidden weapon? Shi Ting laughed. He did not refute or agree with Jian Wushuang. Countless divine powers spread from the feet of Shi Ting, turning into divine butterflies or chasing birds. He slowly stretched out his palm. A chasing bird stopped at his fingertips, flapping its wings and flying up and down. When the bird is willing to stay at the tip of your sword, everything will be done. After saying that, Shi Ting's body turned into a cloud of smoke and disappeared. Along with him, a vast amount of divine power also dissipated. Old sir, Jian Wushuang forced himself to stand up and looked at the place where Shi Ting had disappeared. If it was not for the fact that the broken Dao field was slowly being built, Jian Wushuang would have treated everything that was happening as a dream. After shouting several times, Jian Wushuang finally came back to his senses and felt lost. This old man, who was both a teacher and a friend, had been deeply imprinted in Jian Wushuang's heart after they had spent some time together. What Shi Ting had done was equivalent to saving the last flame of the entire universe. Jian Wushuang took a deep bow in the direction where Shi Ting disappeared. After obtaining his own sword Dao, Jian Wushuang felt that the powerlessness he had when facing the future was rapidly weakening. The future that belonged to him was rapidly opening up. When Jian Wushuang checked his realm subconsciously, he could not help but exclaim. As it turned out, the shackles of the intermediate supreme realm had disappeared without him knowing. It was as if the water had flowed smoothly, and he had advanced to the peak of the high supreme realm. The shackles that would take thousands of years to break through had actually been broken without him knowing it. He clenched his fist and felt strong power surging again. Jian Wushuang swept away his previous fatigue and quickly sat down to stabilize his realm. He had never broken through a whole realm directly before. He had to be careful. After the peak of the high supreme realm, it was the top supreme realm. When he meditated, the endless divine power once again approached him and floated around him like a surge of water. It was as if such a blessed cultivation environment was tailor-made for Jian Wushuang. While he could easily stabilize his realm, he could also concentrate on the sword Dao he had just comprehended. Jian Wushuang, who had been extremely sensitive to sword intent since he was a child, had long known how terrifying the first move of his sword Dao was. The power of the first move of his sword Dao was similar to Tarot, the last move of the Tarot sword manual. The two were comparable or even more so than the Tarot sword manual. Jian Wushuang did not dare to imagine the upper limit of his own sword Dao. This is my own sword Dao, so it should naturally be called Wushuang. But how should I name the sword intent? Jian Wushuang thought for a while and got the answer. Let's call it the Star River Lake Sea Sword Intent. Jian Wushuang's eyes were burning as he decided on the name of the unparalleled sword manual that would shock the world in the future. After performing the sword Dao several times, Jian Wushuang fell asleep with satisfaction. The high supreme realm was not his goal. Even before he had entered the land of sorrows, he had set the minimum requirement for himself to be a top supreme realm. Top supreme realm was his original goal, and now he set this goal on the realm that he had never dared to imagine. Only by risking his life to break through could he have a chance of winning. What the Void Universe had done today would be returned 1,000 times or 10,000 times in the future. The broken Great Dao circulated around Jian Wushuang, who was in a deep sleep, along with his vast divine power. From time to time, there were some runes hidden under his clothes. In this sorrowful land that was enveloped by endless divine power, a humble but tenacious aura was growing continuously. Every disciple of the Divine Life Palace had fallen into a deep sleep for a long time, but it was clear from their frowning brows that none of them had relaxed. The humiliation of being like a stray dog made everyone try their best to break through. One could hear sighs coming from one of the cosmic boats from time to time. The short river spirit sat on the railing and looked at the vast land of sorrow. His eyes were lost in thought. No one knew what he was thinking about. The extreme north of the universe, the lonely starry sky. The starry sky, which had not been seen for hundreds of millions of years, was now filled with nearly 100 traces of supreme divine power. In front of these powerful supremes, the nine-headed snake god opened its vertical pupils in unison and stared at the ruins wrapped in the power of chaos. This is the forbidden land that the ants from the divine power universe escaped to? A sinister and strange voice came out of the snake god's mouth. The master of the god-refining sect, Void Master Ba Huang, nodded and said with an ugly expression, "I was careless that day and let them escape. Since those ants can enter, why can't you?" Snake God looked at Ba Huang and said gloomily, "Did you really not get in? Or did you collude with the enemy to let them go?" Void Warrior Ba Huang's face turned even uglier and he released his void power. "What do you mean?" Snake God was enraged, and an even more terrifying void power crushed down. It was as if a heavenly chasm was about to behead him. Just as the Void Warrior Ba Huang was about to explode, a figure with thick black smoke appeared and suppressed Snake God and Ba Huang's powers. "You again, Devour One!" Snake God was furious, and all 9 heads roared in unison. "Do you really want to go against me?" The black smoke dissipated, and Devour One looked at Snake God and sneered. "Stupid! You're still not worthy of me opposing you. The 2 universes are currently at war, and you're about to kill one of my sect masters without permission. Do you really think that you have the final say in the entire Void universe?" "You!" The Snake God was speechless. He had been given a high hat out of nowhere, which made it difficult for him to speak. After a cold snort, he simply stopped talking. "One day, I'll blast your head into pieces." Snake God was secretly resentful. Devour One did not say anything more, and his eyes shifted from the land of sorrows to the Imperial Ancestor ruins on the other side. "I want to nip all the possibilities in the bud. All of them will die by my hands." Devour One's eyes were cold. Then Devour Two, Devour Three, and the others appeared behind him. "If you want a great fortune, follow me to the Imperial Ancestor ruins." After saying that, Devour One led his group to the Imperial Ancestor ruins. Void Warrior Ba Huang's expression was still ugly. He did not even look at Snake God and followed the Devourers with his sect members. The remaining Void Warriors were eager to move, but they did not dare to because of Snake God. Finally, a 2-scar Void Master mustered his courage and stepped forward. However, before he could say anything, he was crushed into a bloody pulp by Snake God. "One day, I will slaughter your entire God-refining sect," Snake God said fiercely, then ordered the remaining Void Warriors to go straight to the Imperial Ancestor ruins. The Great Catastrophe War between the 2 universes did not show any signs of stopping even though both Cosmos God and Void God had disappeared. The resentment that had accumulated since ancient times seemed to have finally found an outlet and were out of control. 5,000 years passed by. The land of sorrows remained unchanged. The endless divine power was still vast, and even the ownerless divine power derived from it was more abundant. 3,000 figures stood still like statues under the divine power that surrounded the desolate land of sorrows. Each of them looked the same as they did 5,000 years ago. In fact, due to the advancement in their cultivation, they looked much younger. These disciples' breathing was completely closed, and they even only exhaled a mouthful of foul air every 10 years. This cycle continued to repeat, and they underwent a complete transformation. The petite figure that was lying on the railing and seemed to have fallen asleep suddenly jumped up. In terms of the aura of all living things, it was likely that no one could compare to this small and even slightly wretched figure. Lord River Spirit, who had been silent for nearly 5,000 years, leaped up high and landed on the ground like a fish in water. In front of him was the first batch of disciples of the Divine Life Palace who had been meditating since all those years ago. River Spirit's small eyes were wide open. The enlightenment of the disciples closest to him seemed to be about to be integrated. As if to confirm River Spirit's guess, a long breath spiraled around a disciple, and nearly 1,000 long breaths were awakened at the same time. River Spirit's mustache trembled. Ultimate Ruler Realm. This was the aura of an ultimate ruler. If it was just the aura of an ultimate ruler, it would naturally not be able to catch River Spirit's attention. But now there were 3,000 of them. What kind of concept was that? The 3,000 disciples who had remained in the outermost layer only comprehended it for 5,000 years, but they had already reached the ultimate ruler realm. These were only the outer disciples. What about the disciples who were one step ahead? River Spirit recovered from his shock and could not help but feel excited. He knew that the entire Divine Power universe and the Divine Life Palace could be saved. With this in mind, River Spirit could no longer fall into a deep sleep. Like a child, he excitedly rushed into the depths. He wanted to take a good look at what kind of surprise that unparalleled genius, who was constantly growing, would give him. However, just as he was about to set off, River Spirit realized that enlightenment was ethereal. It was fickle, blending with heaven and earth. If he rashly disturbed him, the consequences would be unimaginable. After thinking for a while, River Spirit gave up and said, "Forget it. Let's not disturb that kid for now. It's not too late to talk about it after he has broken through." After making up his mind, River Spirit jumped into the cosmic boat and observed the disciples who were about to wake up with his small eyes. As the ultimate ruler's aura grew more and more pure, the 3,000 disciples at the very edge of the formation all woke up. Heavens! I actually reached the realm of an ultimate ruler. I actually reached that level too. I've only cultivated for a few years, yet I have actually reached such a realm. It's really too terrifying. The 3,000 disciples went from disbelief to ecstasy, and then they wanted to continue moving forward. However, at that moment, coughing sounds came from the cosmic boat, attracting the attention of all 3,000 disciples. Are my eyes playing tricks on me? Lord River Spirit is still alive? Hearing the noise, River Spirit was so angry that he almost jumped off the deck. Enough! Who said that your Lord River Spirit is dead? I'm telling you, even if you stuff me in the void universe right now, I can still live a good life. The wretched old man placed his hands on his hips and said with his eyes wide open. Then he said earnestly, "All right, all of you shut up for Lord River Spirit. For now, don't move forward and stay here. Don't disturb the cultivation of the remaining disciples. You've just become an ultimate ruler, so you must stabilize your cultivation. Don't forget that the realm above you is the real deal." River Spirit's words made the hearts of the 3,000 disciples burn with passion. How could they not understand that all those below the supreme realm were just illusions? In other words, in the war between the two universes, they were at best cannon fodder that were sent to their deaths and could not play any role. Only after becoming a supreme martial artist could they drag one or two enemies down with them before they died. Now that he was in such a land of great fortune, he would not allow himself to waste even a second. Some of the disciples who had a clear mind immediately sat down again and began a new round of enlightenment. The rest of the disciples also entered the realm again after checking their own conditions. As the last flame, the expectation and mission that they had to shoulder would force them to grow. After all the disciples were seated, River Spirit returned to its previous posture and looked at the chaotic sky. When will everything that has happened return to the right track that originally belonged to them? Another 1,000 years passed, and the second batch of disciples began to recover. They had also reached the ultimate ruler realm, and some of them had even begun to touch the barrier to the supreme realm. River Spirit strode forward, and after another round of preaching, he allowed them to continue their comprehension. "Ah, it seems like they can't live without me." The River Spirit heaved a long sigh and put his hands behind his back, ready to make another round of patrol. Swish! As River Spirit turned around, a powerful divine power light pillar rose. Although it was not obvious in the vast divine power, it made River Spirit tremble. The shock that symbolized the achievement of the supreme realm was caused by the third batch of disciples who sat down to comprehend. Then, the second wave of supreme divine power rose. The third, the fourth, the seventh. A total of 7 supreme divine powers shot up into the sky, but they quickly returned to silence. It did not trigger any supreme lightning tribulation, nor did the heavens and earth shake. There was only a symbol of supreme divine power. The 7 disciples who had obtained the supreme great Tao were the first to stand up. They looked at the supreme divine power that appeared in their bodies in disbelief. "I've become a supreme martial artist," one of the older middle-aged disciples murmured softly. When he saw the true supreme power rising with the wind, his eyes instantly turned red. "It seems like the divine power universe can be saved," River Spirit said with a sigh. A gratified look that was completely different from his style of doing things appeared in his small eyes. The land of sorrows did not know the passage of time, but the extremely bored River Spirit counted the days and forcibly counted to the 8,000th year. And it was during these 8,000 years that Supreme Tianyi awakened. A vast amount of divine power shot up into the sky, and the divine power of a top supreme realm became even more profound. In the end, it stopped at the level of the half-invincible supreme realm. 8,000 years, he had broken through the true chasm of heaven and earth. It would only be a matter of time before he became truly invincible. Supreme Junfu also woke up after Tianyi. He had also taken that step, reaching the half-invincible supreme realm. The two of them encouraged each other, gave River Spirit some instructions, and went on with the second round of comprehension. During this time, Jian Wushuang's wife, Lang Rushuang, had already woken up and successfully broken through the realm barrier, staying in the primary supreme realm. At this point, only 3 people had yet to awaken from their enlightenment: Supreme Xue Bo, 9th Culpa King, and Jian Wushuang. The ownerless divine power, which seemed to have gained sentience, no longer wandered aimlessly. It either rushed toward supreme blood, or rushed toward 9th Culpa King like a tide. However, even more ownerless divine power gushed toward the center of the entire land of sorrows along with the divine power left behind by the ancient existences. It was a dojo that belonged to Jian Wushuang. The dome was constructed by all kinds of supreme divine power, and the divine rhythm filled the entire Tao field from top to bottom. It was brilliant gold and brilliant. Under the Tao field were thousands of divine weapons that acted as the foundation and infused the divine aura into the Tao field. In the center of the huge Taoist sanctum, an extremely thin figure sat there. The loose black robe on his upper body had been torn apart by the vast divine power, revealing his strong body with divine patterns. His long hair, which seemed to have been dyed golden by his divine aura, was scattered on the ground like a waterfall of stars. The tarot divine sword was slanted to one side, the blade ringing in its sheath. Jian Wushuang had maintained this posture for 8,000 years. The vast divine power flowed into his body through every pore and nourished every inch of his meridians. Every 100 years, Jian Wushuang would spit out a mouthful of turbid breath and the cycle continued. He had practiced the Wushuang sword Tao that he had just comprehended for 2,000 years. For the past 2,000 years, he had been using his divine sense to draw and withdraw his sword at all times, tempering the Star River Lake Sea sword intent until it was perfect. It was not until the 3,000th year that Jian Wushuang managed to construct the framework of the entire Star River Lake Sea sword intent. The first move he used to fight Shirting only had the simplest star character. The meaning of each character was simple, but when they were finally put together, it was enough to cover the endless universe. This was Jian Wushuang's sword Tao and his ambition. When he had finished polishing the entire sword principle, Jian Wushuang, who was in the chaotic divine consciousness, wanted to open the gift that the former palace master Dao Yan had given him. However, he did not know if it was because of the breathing technique or because his hands were trembling with apprehension, but when he opened Dao Yan's cultivation comprehension, the comprehension of Cosmos God was also opened at the same time. The two majestic cultivation comprehensions made him faint. Another 2,000 years passed. Ha ha! Great, great! Ha 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 ha! A loud laugh that shook the heavens resounded. A thick and restrained divine power surged like a flood dragon that emerged from the water and completely scattered in the sky. Supreme Jun Fu, who had just undergone a second comprehension, had awakened once again. This time, he had awakened to an unbelievable level of invincible supreme. What would have originally taken hundreds of chaos cycles to cultivate had now only taken 2,000 years. This was probably something that had never happened since the primordial chaos began. Supreme Jun Fu, who had entered the invincible supreme godly state, had swept away his previous fatigue. His eyes were like a bright star field, emitting a bright light from the inside out, and he looked solemn. Soon after, Supreme Tian woke up and also entered the invincible supreme divine realm. The two old friends who had accompanied each other for countless chaos cycles smiled at each other, their eyes brimming with tears. The divine life palace had been humiliated again and again because they were not strong enough. The divine power universe had fallen, and countless supreme talents had been killed. Only by constantly risking their lives to break through could they protect what they wanted to protect. Tian, Supreme Jun Fu laughed arrogantly. You and I have both entered the invincible supreme divine realm. Why don't we spar today to temper ourselves? That's what I was thinking. Tian laughed, and a divine bow that could destroy the world appeared in his hand. Supreme Jun Fu immediately retreated a few thousand feet, while countless ownerless divine powers began to construct a Taoist rite temple. In the small training hall, the two figures instantly erupted with the might of invincible supremes. The boundless divine power was no longer as abundant as it had been before he had become a half-invincible supreme. Instead, it seemed to possess a mind of its own, and it was rather restrained. The two invincible supreme martial artists began their most satisfying battle. Tianyi's grip tightened on his divine bow and used his own divine power as an arrow. In an instant, the arrow shot out like a phoenix's tail feather, sweeping toward Supreme Jun Fu. Jun Fu expanded in the wind, and the two collided heavily. The resulting explosion directly tore apart the newly built dojo. Countless crystalline lights were drawn to the divine bow. Tian laughed and released the shot toward Jun Fu. Supreme Jun Fu leaned his axe against his back. As his figure changed, he met the attack with a sky-splitting force. The crimson divine power clashed with the crystal blue light. The might of an invincible supreme once again tore apart the training ground and completely dissipated into the world. Since the entire D-Land of Sorrows was constructed from an even more ancient and vast divine power, Jun Fu and Tianyi's magical abilities were greatly restricted. Perhaps it was because the soaring battle intent stirred up the dormant divine power. Some of the disciples who had gained enlightenment for the second time started to wake up. The awakened disciples were at least at the level of an ultimate ruler, and at the same time new supreme divine powers began to appear. From the original 7 supreme divine realm experts, it started to increase to 2 digits, and there were still signs of it increasing. Perhaps she had sensed some kind of aura. Lung Rushuang woke up from her enlightenment. A new power rose from her meridians. A magnificent dark blue divine power shot into the sky and then dissipated. Lung Rushuang had entered the supreme divine realm. It's really a little noisy. A slightly lazy voice was heard, and the white-haired 9th Kulpa King woke up from his comprehension. There were no fluctuations of a breakthrough, and he did not even reveal any divine power. It was as if he had a good sleep. However, the more this was the case with 9th Kulpa King, the more terrifying he was. He was like a divine sword that hit its edge, but it revealed its sharpness in its calmness. A profound light surged in his eyes, and a faint smile hung on the corner of his mouth. Can the power of a top supreme martial artist reach such a level? If I were to advance even a little more. Only 9th Kulpa King himself knew that it only took him 8,000 years to completely cross a major realm and touch the more mysterious realm. He was confident that he would definitely become an invincible supreme within a chaos cycle. And that guy, what kind of miracles would he pull of this time? 9th Kulpa King's deep and pure eyes looked at the Taoist Rite Temple in the distant chaos. Lan Lan had awoken. She had attained the Tao under the command of Cosmos God. So she had long been indifferent to the matters of cultivation realms. It was also because of her state of mind that she had leaped to the peak of the high supreme realm. She did not pay much attention to the progress of her cultivation realm. The moment she woke up, she looked at Jian Wushuang's dojo with worry. Unless one's divine power had reached the level of Cosmos God, any individual power that could not be measured on the battlefield would appear extremely weak in front of the decision-makers who could save the situation. As for Lan Lan, she had long regarded Jian Wushuang as the decision-maker who could turn the tide. Although the divine power universe had already fallen, the last flame was still growing under the pressure of the void universe. The next generation showed immense promise. Everyone's eyes were focused on the bright dojo. They were all waiting for that tenacious young man who had never slacked in his training to create a miracle. After destroying countless Taoist fields of divine power, the two invincible supremes finally stopped, and the divine power that suppressed the universe was completely retracted into their bodies. Great! It's really great! Supreme Tian-Yi kept his divine bow and laughed heartily. Supreme Junfu nodded his head and said arrogantly, "Now, I have the power to fight even a six-scar void master." After putting away their divine arts, the two of them landed on the ground. "Congratulations to the two of you for entering the invincible realm." Lan Lan stepped forward and cupped her hands. Supreme Junfu nodded and said, "Thank you, Miss Lan Lan. The fact that the two of us were able to advance to the invincible supreme realm is a sign of the heavenly Tao's pity for our divine power universe." In less than 10,000 years, Junfu Supreme and Supreme Tian-Yi had both become invincible supremes. Apart from the pity of the heavenly Tao, they did not seem to have any other fortuitous encounters in this land of great creation. Supreme Tian-Yi chuckled in response. "I think that we'll have another invincible supreme soon." "Oh!" They immediately turned to look at Supreme Shuebo. The divine force field that surrounded Shuebo was like a huge golden cocoon, completely wrapping his body within it. Outsiders could only vaguely see his figure. Junfu Supreme frowned and muttered to himself, "Shuebo is a half-invincible supreme, and he has been on the brink of the invincible realm for a long time. Logically speaking, he should have had a much easier time than the two of us. Why is there no sign of a breakthrough even now?" "Don't worry. After Shuebo successfully advances to the invincible supreme realm, I'm afraid his strength will be much stronger than the two of us," Supreme Tian-Yi replied. After spending nearly endless years together, he had never doubted the strength of his old friend. "I hope so," Junfu said, nodding. Only Lan Lan's gaze changed slightly when she looked at the Taoist right temple that Supreme Shuebo had comprehended. The white-haired ninth Kulpa King, who looked a little lonely, had been looking at Jian Wushuang's dojo from the beginning to the end. He was eager to see how this heaven's favorite would appear and how far he would be left behind. He probably did not even know when he had used Jian Wushuang as a flag and made him the target he was chasing after. Supreme Junfu, ninth Kulpa King, suddenly said with a sincere look, "Forgive me for being abrupt. Can I ask Supreme Junfu to come and examine my state of mind?" When Junfu Supreme heard this, he did not show any displeasure. Instead, he looked at ninth Kulpa King with even more admiration. "Of course, I can also see what kind of surprise this other peerless genius will bring me." Ninth Kulpa King agreed and rose to the sky with Junfu. These vast divine powers that had been preserved from ancient times to this day seemed to be very sensitive to fighting intent, and they were also like spectators who did not mind watching a show. They fought to have good seats and views of the Taoist temple. "Supreme Ninth Kulpa, I won't hold back later." Supreme Junfu smiled as a divine axe appeared in his hand. Junfu Supreme stood still and waved his hand, causing the terrifying might of an invincible supreme to burst out. It was as if the gates of heaven had opened and a huge sea was crashing down. In just one move, ninth Kulpa King's power that belonged to a top supreme realm was instantly suppressed. He only felt like a lonely boat in a huge sea, which could be destroyed at any time. Even the flow of his supreme divine power slowed down a lot. Supreme Junfu stomped his feet on the ground, and the divine axe in his hand expanded in the wind. Countless divine patterns rose from the handle of the axe, completely enveloping it. With a gentle wave, An axe light that could tear apart the dome of any star field burst out from the tip of the blade and slashed at Ninth Culpa King in a three-edged manner. Even in the suppressed realm of an invincible supreme, Ninth Culpa King's performance was still remarkable. His fist, which was completely wrapped with the might of a top supreme divine power, slammed directly into the training hall on the ground. He used the force to quickly rise into the air and paused for a moment. Then, nearly 100 rays of cold divine power swept out from his palm and stabbed at Supreme Jun Fu. Each ray of cold light contained the power of a top supreme martial artist, covering the sky and earth. Supreme Jun Fu did not have time to dodge, and could only raise his axe to block. The cold light only left a faint white spot on the axe. Descending from the sky, Ninth Culpa King emitted a unique white light, and an illusory phantom image condensed behind him. Then, he brazenly collided with the Jun Fu Supreme. Rumble! The majestic divine power shattered into mottled stars that fell like the Star River. A deep sound like a bell rang from the axe. The stars scattered. Under this blow, Ninth Culpa King himself suffered a backlash, causing him to fly backward. A wisp of divine blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. As for Supreme Jun Fu, he was finally forced to take a few steps back. Ninth Culpa King wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth with his sleeve and slowly got up. To be able to shake an invincible Supreme Realm expert with just a top Supreme Realm cultivation, you're indeed a heaven's favorite. Supreme Jun Fu waved his hand and prepared his long axe on his back. Are you willing to try this move of mine, which I obtained after entering the invincible Supreme Realm? Ninth Culpa King was stunned. He immediately said solemnly, I'm willing to try. Supreme Jun Fu did not say anything else. His gray-white hair suddenly broke free from the ribbon and danced wildly in the air. The silver-white axe in his hand began to shine with a golden light under the blessing of divine power. The majestic divine power began to be restrained, as if it was all poured into the divine axe. Nearly 10 shadows that looked very similar to Supreme Jun Fu quietly appeared. They were bare-chested and carried their axes on their backs, like ancient giants who had awakened at the same time. This is the divine ability I gained after entering the invincible state, the 11 figures said in unison. Divine power sky splitter. In an instant, a brilliant light bloomed. 11 figures raised the big axes in their hands high, as if they were really splitting the sky, and chopped at Ninth Culpa King. The 11 axe lights combined to form an illusion of mighty axe and fell heavily. Looking at the axe shadow falling from the sky, Ninth Culpa King's eyes seemed to be enlightened. It was as if he had returned to the day he listened to Tao in Ling Shao Palace, crossing tens of thousands of lotus peaks, with auspicious lights circulating and long green smoke curling up. What is the Tao you understand? What is the Tao that I understand? The Tao I understand is to press forward with indomitable will. Although I have died 9 times, I still do not regret it. It is the Tao of welcoming death and living. This is my Tao. When the sky-splitting giant axe fell, Ninth Culpa King opened his eyes, and countless cold glints rose to the sky without fear. What followed was a light so bright that it seemed that the entire arena was bathed in white. The light lasted a very long time. As the light slowly faded, Supreme Jun Fu stepped on the wind and landed, and Ninth Culpa King fell asleep in his arms. Ninth Culpa Supreme had an enlightenment. He has already understood the path ahead, Jun Fu Supreme said with a smile. You bastard. Supreme Tianyi shook his head with a bitter smile. You're so rough even when it comes to imparting your Tao. Even I almost thought that was your full-powered strike. Supreme Jun Fu smiled and waved his hand to form a small Taoist right temple, placing Ninth Culpa King inside. Then, everyone's eyes looked into the depths again. Palace Master Wushuang, it's time to wake up. Time flew by, and under Lord River Spirit's diligent recording, 12,000 years passed by in the blink of an eye. All the disciples of the Divine Life Palace who were in deep sleep were awakened. In this great fortune, other than the disciples who died in the passage first, the remaining 11,000 disciples all reached the ultimate ruler realm. In addition, There were nearly 300 disciples who had successfully transcended and advanced to the supreme realm. There were more than 300 supreme martial artists in total. Even the Dragon Clan, which had been passed down to this day, did not have such skill, such foundation. This was a scene that no one could imagine. When Supreme Tianyi and Supreme Junfu saw this scene, tears streamed down their faces. They immediately knelt 3 times at the place where Shurting had disappeared. All the disciples of the Divine Life Palace had become the ultimate trump cards of the entire Divine Power universe. Although these 300 Supremes were only at the primary stage, as long as they broke through the Supreme stages, which was, then the intermediate and high Supreme realms would be easy to achieve. Ever since all the disciples had awakened, Supreme Junfu and Supreme Tianyi had been working hard to speed up the cultivation of all the disciples and help them stabilize their cultivation. Since the battle between Ninth Culpa King and Supreme Junfu, Ninth Culpa sat down and meditated again. When he woke up 2,000 years later, his originally sharp divine power began to tend to be restrained, with a great momentum of hiding it. The light in his eyes was even more intense than before, and the most difficult shackles to break through also began to show signs of fading. Everything was developing toward a flourishing direction. Only 2 people showed no signs of waking up. One of them was Jian Wushuang, while the other was Supreme Shuebo. For this reason, Supreme Junfu had specially assigned 12 disciples to be in charge of observing and patrolling the area. Once there was any movement, they would immediately send a message. Third brother, how long do you think it will take for our palace master to wake up? It has already been 12,000 years. I'm afraid. Before the young disciple could finish his sentence, he was hit on the head. Shut up. It's only been 10,000 years. And you're already giving up? What are you going to do when you become a supreme and have to sit there for hundreds of chaos cycles? The middle-aged disciple who was addressed as third brother said sternly. The young disciple rubbed his head and pouted, not daring to say anything. In the patrol team of 12, only the middle-aged man was a primary supreme. The rest of the people were at the ultimate ruler realm. Naturally, he was in charge of observing Jian Wushuang's dojo. As he stepped forward, an ownerless divine power naturally lifted the middle-aged disciple and swept toward the vast Taoist sanctum in the center. The huge Taoist sanctum that covered Jian Wushuang was now covered with a thick layer of golden light, and it was harder to see what was inside. He stepped on the ownerless divine power and was about to land when the sky suddenly shook. Then, the ownerless divine power under his feet suddenly went crazy and shot back uncontrollably. Due to the suddenness of the incident, the middle-aged disciple fell from a high altitude without any warning and landed heavily on the ground. Third brother. The other 11 disciples rushed over and helped the middle-aged disciple up. It seems that this divine power is not easy to control. He shook his head helplessly and smiled bitterly. He subconsciously looked up and suddenly trembled. The huge dojo that had been hovering in the air for 10,000 years began to seep with thick golden water. How did this happen? In the next moment, countless wisps of golden water suddenly surged like the galaxy in the sky. Hurry! Hurry up and leave this place. The middle-aged disciple was the first to react. He immediately released his supreme divine power to push the 11 people away. The golden water gushed forth as if the gates of heaven had opened, pouring down on the ground. At this moment, the huge Taoist sanctum that had been covered in dust for tens of thousands of years suddenly shattered. The stars scattered, and the light of treasures circulated. The thousands of silent divine weapons also shrieked in unison, as if they were waiting for their former master. The golden water and silver river gushed out, but the moment they touched the ground, they condensed into a great Tao of divine power. The huge Tao field shattered, and the brilliant power shook the universe. Supreme Junfu and Supreme Tianyi, who were guiding the tens of thousands of disciples in their meditation, looked at the place where the golden might was shining and immediately transformed into 2 streams of divine power that shot out. Lan Lan's body trembled as she looked in that direction in disbelief. Ninth Culpa King slowly opened his eyes, which were full of smiles. The next moment, he soared into the sky and rushed to the Taoist sanctum. River Spirit, who was sleeping soundly on the deck, jumped up when he heard this. The sky has changed. The sky has changed. When the tens of thousands of disciples saw this, they looked at each other and rushed forward. The great path of divine power was constructed by the thick and majestic golden water. It was full of brilliant might, and there were thousands of forms of divine power on it. It was magnificent and sacred. The shattered Tao field of divine power slowly fell like thousands of stars. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the most dazzling star in the sky. A muscular upper body was covered in countless golden divine patterns. A brilliant might flowed out from his eyes and every pore. This figure was only left with a tattered black robe and pants at his waist. But even so, it could not hide his divine might. It was as if he had returned to his most original existence. A pure golden light and an exuberant purple light blended together and appeared around his body in the form of lightning. He was Jian Wushuang. When his feet touched the ground, all the stars in the sky were destroyed, and a brilliant golden pattern was reflected on his body. The big and small lotus buds bloomed together, and the magnificent lotus bloomed in the great Tao. As the purple light receded from his eyes, Jian Wushuang felt as if he had woken up from a chaotic dream that was so long ago that it was the beginning of the world. He walked on the road in a daze. With every step he took, his spiritual sense became a little clearer. His long hair was shining with golden light, and each step he took had divine patterns flowing on it. Everyone held their breath. Even Jun Fu and Tian Yi, who were already invincible supremes, felt an indescribable pressure. This kind of pressure was the purest form of suppression. It had nothing to do with one's cultivation realm. It was a more profound level of life. There was no disbelief or jealousy in Ninth Kalpa King's eyes. There was only joy from the bottom of his heart, as well as a touch of the most sincere passion. This was the pride that belonged only to Ninth Kalpa King, and it could not be tainted by any distracting thoughts. How could I, Ninth Kalpa King, not reach Jian Wushuang's cultivation realm? Supreme Jun Fu was the first to react. Facing the great Tao and Jian Wushuang, he knelt down on one knee without hesitation and said in a bell-like voice, "Welcome, Palace Master Wushuang." Tens of thousands of disciples knelt down and shouted in unison, "All disciples of the Divine Life Palace welcome Palace Master Wushuang." Their voices reverberated through the entire desolate land of sorrows, and Jian Wushuang became completely clear-headed. His purple eyes looked at the tens of thousands of disciples, and a long-lost smile appeared on his face. 10,000 years of loneliness would only be exchanged for a more vigorous new life. Countless rays of golden light scattered in the wind and swept toward the crowd with the breeze. "There's no need to be so formal. Everyone, please stand up." Jian Wushuang laughed lightly. The tens of thousands of disciples only felt warmth on their knees. A gentle force lifted everyone up. "Thank you, Palace Master Wushuang," all the disciples said in unison. The divine radiance flowing around his body was completely retracted as he flew in front of Jun Fu and Supreme Tian Yi. Looking at the godlike figure in front of him, Supreme Jun Fu's eyes were slightly moist. He only called out to Palace Master Wushuang and secretly shed tears. Upon seeing this, Supreme Tian Yi nudged him with his elbow and said in a low voice, "I say, old friend, Palace Master Wushuang has come out of seclusion. You should be happy. Why are you crying again? Why do you care? This old man can cry however I want. No one can control me." Supreme Jun Fu retorted like a child. Supreme Tian Yi shook his head helplessly. Jian Wushuang naturally understood Supreme Jun Fu's frustration. Then, he placed his palm on Supreme Jun Fu's shoulder and said solemnly, "Don't worry, Supreme Jun Fu. I'll make them go back to where they came from. They'll pay for their debt with blood." Supreme Jun Fu hurriedly wiped his tears with his sleeves and cupped his hands. "I, Supreme Jun Fu, am a subordinate of the Divine Life Palace. I am willing to follow Palace Master Wushuang's orders." Supreme Tian Yi of the Divine Life Palace is willing to follow Palace Master Wushuang's orders. Supreme Tian Yi replied. Ninth Kalpa King smiled, cupped his hands and said, "I, Supreme Ninth Kalpa of the Divine Life Palace, am willing to be at Palace Master Wushuang's disposal." Jian Wushuang nodded and looked at the tens of thousands of disciples of the Divine Life Palace. His fighting spirit soared to the sky. Palace Master Wushuang, out of the 11,000 disciples, 300 of them have reached the Supreme Realm, while the rest have reached the Ultimate Ruler Realm. They can already fight in the Great Catastrophe battlefield. Supreme Jun Fu analyzed the general situation as he advanced through the Land of Sorrows. However, the battle between the Invincible Supreme and the 6 Scar Void Masters, Supreme Jun Fu did not continue. When the Great Catastrophe War had just started, the 40-odd 6 Scar Void Masters from the Void Universe had almost dominated the entire battlefield. If the high-end combat forces could not be balanced, the direction of this war would still lean toward the Void Universe. Moreover, the Void Universe still had Snake God, a terrifying existence that had surpassed the Invincible Supreme Realm. Jian Wushuang did not say anything at first. Leave Snake God to me. As for the number of the Invincible Supremes, I'll gather a few more after we leave the Land of Sorrows. Ninth Kulpa King also stopped in his tracks, and a hint of bitterness appeared in his eyes. In just 10,000 years, Jian Wushuang had grown to such a level? He had thought that, with his top supreme cultivation, he would be able to fight Jian Wushuang. However, everything had changed. Jian Wushuang's target was Snake God in the Void Universe. I'm already a half-invincible supreme. I think it won't be a problem for me to face Snake God in the Void Universe, Jian Wushuang added. Jun Fu and Tian Yi were shocked. Back then, Jian Wushuang could kill a Supreme Divine Realm expert when he was only at the Ultimate Ruler Realm. He had always killed those at a higher realm and created miracles. Now that he was already at the half-invincible Supreme Realm, could he really cross the heavenly chasm? However, Jian Wushuang pondered for a moment, looked at Supreme Jun Fu and said, "I'll have to trouble you later." Supreme Jun Fu understood, and he immediately agreed. Supreme Shuebo, Jian Wushuang watched from afar. Supreme Shuebo was still sitting in the middle of the vast divine power. Supreme Tian Yi shook his head. He hasn't awakened from his meditative state. There must be a great opportunity waiting for him. Jian Wushuang nodded. Shuebo had already been a half-invincible supreme before he had reached enlightenment, so it was not difficult for him to break through to the invincible supreme realm. The fact that he had been able to reach this stage meant that he was probably already progressing toward an even more mysterious realm. A moment later, all the disciples of the Divine Life Palace gathered around Jian Wushuang and came to a relatively empty place. He waved his hand and built a huge Taoist Rite temple under the firmament, then jumped onto it with Supreme Jun Fu. Who do you guys think will win? I am guessing that Supreme Jun Fu will win. He's an invincible supreme, after all, someone who can easily suppress ordinary supremes with a wave of his hand. I guess Palace Master Wushuang will win. Don't forget that Palace Master Wushuang was able to kill a Supreme Realm expert when he was only at the Ultimate Ruler Realm. Now, Palace Master Wushuang is only at the half-invincible realm. Isn't it easy for him to fight an invincible supreme? That seems to be the case. The tens of thousands of disciples were in a clamor as they discussed animatedly. Supreme Tian Yi snorted, and all the disciples immediately fell silent. Only the strong wind in the sky was blowing. Jian Wushuang, who was like a god, stood on the spot. The vast and vigorous divine power made the ends of his hair emit a golden light. As soon as Supreme Jun Fu stepped onto the stage, he immediately summoned his divine axe and waited. He would never treat Jian Wushuang as an ordinary half-invincible supreme expert. Thus, he was able to immediately raise his divine power to the level of an invincible supreme. Palace Master Wushuang, I won't hold back, so please don't be offended, Supreme Jun Fu said in a deep voice. The divine axe in his hand was already trembling. Jian Wushuang nodded and his own divine power emerged from the ground. Supreme Jun Fu brandished his Jun Fu, sending a scorching astral wind that could destroy a star slashing forward. However, when the 10 astral winds touched Jian Wushuang's divine power, they were destroyed like snow melting. Supreme Jun Fu's eyes narrowed. He knew that ordinary moves were no longer effective against Jian Wushuang. Taking a deep breath, He held the divine axe vertically in front of him and began to restrain all of the divine power that had been dispersed. As his divine power shrank, Supreme Jun Fu's figure began to transform into 10 figures. 20, 30. There were a total of 30 Supreme Jun Fus, and every single one of them possessed his complete divine power. This is the divine power I comprehended after I entered the invincible Supreme Realm. In a one-on-one battle, no one in the same realm as me can stop me. Supreme Jun Fu had an unyielding nature, and his Tao was also indomitable. His strike was so powerful that no one dared to compete with him. Divine power, sky splitter. The endless divine power was combined into one, and the 30 phantom images turned into a line. The sky in the Taoist sanctum turned into chaos, leaving only the illusion of a huge divine axe that tore the chaos apart. Like a mighty figure from the beginning, all gods, ghosts, demons, and evil had to obey his orders. The foul air sank while the clear air rose. The chaotic sky was torn apart easily, and the heaven-splitting axe went straight for Jian Wushuang. Everyone held their breath in shock. Even some of the disciples who were determined to win turned to look at Supreme Jun Fu. In the next moment, thousands of purple-gold divine light beams rose from the chaos like the Milky Way. At the same time, a magnificent heavenly gate appeared above the chaos. A brilliant light sprinkled toward the chaos, and the vast heavenly gate suddenly opened. Jian Wushuang was suspended in the air with a majestic aura. His eyes seemed to pierce through the chaos and locked onto Supreme Jun Fu. A giant finger that seemed to carry the power of the ancient gods reached out from the heavenly gate. The mighty divine power descended with a finger. The divine axe that seemed to be able to split open the chaos of the universe collided with the giant finger. However, in just a breath, thousands of cracks appeared on the surface of the divine axe, and the surging divine power poured out. The heaven-splitting divine axe did not even last for a second when it collided with the heavenly gate's giant finger. It was shattered immediately. His precious form was destroyed, and even his chaotic aura was severely damaged. Supreme Jun Fu was sent flying far away, and his aura instantly became extremely weak. However, the giant finger merely paused for a moment before continuing its advance towards Supreme Jun Fu. Supreme Tianyi's expression changed drastically, and he immediately rushed into the training hall. He opened his palm and the divine bow appeared in his hand. Tianyi shot out thousands of beams of godly light in order to intimidate the terrifying finger. The divine power of heaven's might gushed out from the heavenly gate, nourishing the giant finger. The 1,000 streaks of divine light unleashed by the invincible supreme expert were only able to leave a faint mark on the massive finger. In fact, they were unable to stop it for even a single moment. The heaven-reaching giant finger continued to press down, and the pressure that gushed out of the heavenly gate completely suppressed the figures of Supreme Jun Fu and Supreme Tianyi. The two of them were unable to move an inch. Ninth Culpa King also saw that something was wrong. He pressed his feet and his figure rose to the dojo without hesitation. Pitch-black divine patterns emerged around his body, and the vast divine power of a top supreme and half-invincible realm was emitted. An illusionary figure with a bare upper body and impressive divine patterns appeared behind Ninth Culpa King. Then, he and the illusionary figure behind him appeared to be holding up the sky and heavily collided with the finger. Boom, boom, boom. The Taoist field instantly shattered, and the shadow behind Ninth Culpa King instantly dimmed. Divine blood gushed out from the corner of his mouth. Wake up, Jian Wushuang! Ninth Culpa King's gums were stained with blood as he roared. Supreme Jun Fu and Supreme Tianyi exchanged a glance before summoning their respective forms and sending them crashing toward the giant finger. However, an unbelievable scene appeared. The two invincible Supreme Phantoms and one top Supreme Phantom form only managed to block the attack for a few breaths of time before they were completely shattered. Not good. Lan Lan's heart trembled. She flew up to the shattered Tao field and released her divine power to block it. Then, Lung Rushuang also flew up. 300 primary supreme martial artists and more than 10,000 ultimate rulers also rose into the sky at this moment. Facing the giant finger that reached the sky, they twisted into a rope and released their own power. Jian Wushuang was in great pain. He had long been lost in his own desolate and empty divine sense. The heavenly gate was created by Jian Wushuang after he comprehended a profound ancestral skill left in his memory by Cosmos God. This was an ancestral skill that transcended the supreme divine realm and would grow as the user's cultivation realm grew. Jian Wushuang had used an ancestral skill that should not have belonged to his half-invincible supreme cultivation realm. Getting lost was the best outcome. His consciousness was in a state where no one was taking over. Ancestral skill, transcendence, heavenly gate. Jian Wushuang hovered in the sky and the golden divine patterns around him were brilliant. He looked like an ancient, unparalleled existence. As soon as he finished speaking, the giant finger easily crushed the divine power barrier formed by 10,000 people. The terror of being caught in the middle of life and death by Void God's palm attack instantly surged into their minds. Tens of thousands of disciples turned pale. They had nowhere to run. Ninth Culpa King looked bitter as he looked at Jian Wushuang, who was hanging in the sky with his eyes closed. He slowly closed his eyes and suddenly said, "You must live well." In an instant, it was as if the mountain wind had blown over the sea and the spring water had melted. The finger that was pressing down suddenly stopped above everyone's heads. Hurry up and leave." Jian Wushuang's voice resounded. Looking over, they saw Jian Wushuang hanging between heaven and earth. His eyes were clear, and his arms were bulging as he blocked the attack from landing. Ninth Culpa King immediately reacted, and his vigorous divine power burst out, pushing tens of thousands of disciples with all his might. After everyone was out of danger, the giant finger pressed down heavily. Heaven and earth slightly changed color. Rumble, rumble, rumble. After an unknown period of time, Ninth Culpa King's slightly complaining voice sounded. "You released such a ridiculous attack. Are you trying to kill us?" Sitting in front of a huge pit, Jian Wushuang rubbed his nose awkwardly. I wanted to try this attack at that time. I didn't expect that the power would be so terrifying that even I fell into it." Ninth Culpa King shook his head helplessly. "I'll remember this. In the future, you'll have to carry Snake God's head to make up for this. That attack just now was truly terrifying," said Supreme Jun Fu, still feeling a lingering fear in his heart. "If it were on the battlefield, I'm afraid that no invincible Supreme would be able to withstand that attack." Jian Wushuang replied, "I can't master that move now. If it weren't for Ninth Culpa waking me up, the consequences would be unimaginable. So, I won't use it again unless I'm on the battlefield." Supreme Tianyi nodded and said, "Palace Master Wushuang, are we going to continue comprehending in the Land of Sorrows, or are we going to the Divine Power Universe and fight with the Void Universe?" Jian Wushuang thought for a while, and then said, "You guys continue to cultivate in the Land of Sorrows. I will go to the Void Universe alone to pick up those who should have returned but can't." "Pick up those who should return, but can't?" Supreme Jun Fu muttered, his body shaking. Could it be that Palace Master Dao Yen is still alive? Tian Yi's body trembled. Jian Wushuang did not deny nor confirm it. "When I was in the Void Universe, I met Palace Master Dao Yen in the Land of Gods. Palace Master Dao Yen personally gave me the Palace Master's token at that time. Furthermore, he passed all of his comprehensions of creation to me. Then, his soul dissipated. At that time, due to Supreme Bing Ye's death battle with me, I didn't have time to investigate the traces of life that Palace Master Dao Yen left behind. Now that I think about it, Palace Master Dao Yen must still be in deep sleep there." Jian Wushuang said sincerely, "Regardless of whether Palace Master Dao Yen is dead or not, I will make a trip there because he belongs to the Divine Power Universe. Even if he dies and his Dao vanishes, I will still bring him back." Supreme Jun Fu and Supreme Tianyi knelt in front of Jian Wushuang immediately, tears streaming down their faces. "Thank you, Palace Master Wushuang. Jun Fu and Tianyi will obey the Palace Master's orders until death. No need to be so polite. I'll get back what the Void Universe owes us, bit by bit." Jian Wushuang lifted the two of them up with a serious look. Ninth Culpa came to Jian Wushuang and said in a deep voice, "This trip is dangerous. I'll go to the void universe with you so that we can look out for each other." Jian Wushuang pondered for a while and shook his head. "No, the two of us are too big a target. We may be discovered at any time. Besides, I have a secret technique that can completely disguise myself as a void master of the void universe. I think it won't be a big problem." Ninth Culpa King did not insist. After telling him to be careful on the road, he did not speak again. Jian Wushuang nodded and left the Land of Sorrows after giving Jun Fu and Tian Yi some instructions. "Husband, I can't help you, so please be careful." Lung Rushuang's eyes were bitter. "You being by my side is the greatest help to me. The years without you are the true desolation." Looking at the woman who had no regrets and had been with him until now, Jian Wushuang hugged her gently. Then, his body turned into a long rainbow and he headed to the exit of the Land of Sorrows. "With such a pure and kind heart, I can't see through Palace Master Wushuang's future," Supreme Jun Fu murmured as he looked at the sky where Jian Wushuang had disappeared. Stepping into the dark and lonely passage again, all kinds of heart-palpitating and painful wails disappeared. Even the resentment that had existed since ancient times had disappeared without a trace. Jian Wushuang started to feel that the god burial ground seemed to be dissipating slowly in some form. The originally long and endless passage had reached its end with a single thought from Jian Wushuang. As soon as he stepped out of the silent passage, the cold and withered star area appeared in front of Jian Wushuang. The starry sky 10,000 years later was no different from the starry sky 10,000 years ago. The only difference might be the traces of void energy that were about to completely dissipate left in the star field. Did people from the void universe come here again? Jian Wushuang frowned and looked at the imperial ancestor ruins. The ruins that exuded the dark fog and separated the universe and the starry sky did not change at all. After thinking for a while, Jian Wushuang waved his hand and summoned a cosmic boat. Then he set off into the distance. A few months later, a handsome young ranger in a loose black robe stopped in front of the 23rd crack that led to the void universe. Since the two universes were still in the midst of the Great Catastrophe War, various void masters would come out of the cracks from time to time and rush to the Divine Power universe, which had already opened its door. At the same time, they also strengthened the patrolling void masters around these void cracks that led to the Divine Power universe. Currently, there were 15 four-scar void masters stationed in the 23rd void crack. At the same time, a terrifying aura belonging to a 6-scar void master was surging out from the dark. The young man, dressed like a young ranger, was naturally Jian Wushuang. His eyes were like a deep spring as he arrived in front of the crack in one step. "Who's there?" A black mist emerged and a patrol team of 3 void masters with 4 scars blocked Jian Wushuang's way, their eyes alert. "My lords, my allies." Jian Wushuang laughed lightly and raised his hand to reveal a wisp of void power. Jian Wushuang was calm and composed. "I come from the Liang Starfield, from the Annihilating Fire sect. In response to the call of Void God, I have gone the Divine Power universe 13,000 years ago." "Then why did you return alone? Shouldn't you be serving the Void God on the battlefield?" the 4-scar void master asked. Jian Wushuang did not say anything. He took out 3 obsidian boxes from his interspatial ring and handed them to the leader. A strange medicinal fragrance wafted out of the box. Seeing this, the furious 4-scar void master immediately put the box away with a wave of his sleeve. After a few fake coughs, the 4-scar void master said loudly, "So you miss your hometown. Forget it. Go home quickly and don't let your family worry about you." Jian Wushuang agreed and was about to step into the crack. The next moment, a powerful and suppressed voice rang out from the darkness. "Hold on." Suddenly, a faint sense of danger welled up in his heart. "Or have I been discovered?" Jian Wushuang stopped in his tracks. Then, a boundless void power surged out from the deep crack in front of him. Along with the appearance of the void energy, a middle-aged man dressed in purple and gold robes also appeared. The few people who had been secretly rejoicing immediately knelt on the ground when they saw who it was. "Greetings, Joji Emperor." The middle-aged man in a purple-gold robe fixed his eyes on Jian Wushuang and shouted in a deep voice. "You're not from my void universe. Are you trying to enter? A six-scar void master?" Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and his black robe fluttered. The successor of the patrol team also noticed that something was wrong and immediately surrounded them. Zhuji Emperor sneered. "It seems that you're not from the void universe. Are you willing to offer your head? Or do you want me to twist it off? The head is here if you can take it, then come and take it." Jian Wushuang said indifferently. "You've got guts. Die!" Zhuji Emperor roared, and an extreme void power crushed over. Jian Wushuang moved his feet slightly and pushed forward with his palm. The seemingly ordinary palm strike actually directly shattered the void power astral wind that rushed over. Zhuji Emperor's eyes narrowed. This guy, who looked like he had at most the cultivation of two scar, could shatter his void power with a wave of his hand? With that in mind, Zhuji Emperor no longer acted arrogantly. An emperor's sword that contained immense void power appeared in his hand, and he slashed down with all his might. Containing the full power of a six-scar void warrior, the sword light split the starry sky. "Small tricks." Jian Wushuang sneered disdainfully and immediately pressed forward with his finger. The unparalleled energy directly hit the sword light, and the unstoppable sword light turned dim and dissipated in an instant. The force from Jian Wushuang's finger did not slow down. It passed through the protection of the void power and directly pressed on the right shoulder where Zhuji Emperor held the sword. An invisible force shot out of his body and tore off his entire right arm. His right arm, which was holding the Emperor's sword, fell into the boundless starry sky and was torn apart by the astral wind. With just one strike, he had easily destroyed one of the arms of a six-scar void master. This made the 3- and 4-scar void masters, who had been preparing to launch a sneak attack, retreat from the battle without a trace. Zhuji Emperor, who had lost an arm, looked at Jian Wushuang in disbelief. How could an ant destroy a giant elephant? With important matters at hand, Jian Wushuang ended the battle quickly. He raised his palm high and slammed it down heavily like God's judgment. Suddenly, unparalleled divine power turned into a huge palm print and slammed down on Zhuji Emperor's head. The horror of life and death struck fear into Zhuji Emperor's heart. He did not even have time to turn around before he was crushed into meat paste by the giant palm. A great emperor of a holy kingdom had died by the hands of Jian Wushuang. Killing a six-scar void master with a single move as a half-invincible supreme was beyond the knowledge of all the supremes in the two universes. With a thud, the 3- and 4-scar void masters knelt down in front of Jian Wushuang. Scoffing, Jian Wushuang strode into the void universe after killing him. There were a total of 17 void masters patrolling the 23rd crack. Apart from the most powerful Zhuji Emperor, there were 7 void masters with 5 scars hiding in the depths. In order to prevent the news of him entering the void universe from spreading too quickly, Jian Wushuang simply sealed the entire area with his superpower and killed the remaining void masters one by one. After doing all this quickly, Jian Wushuang's body turned into a flowing light and swept toward the path in his memory. There were billions of star fields in the void universe, and the larger star fields and holy lands were already in a state of war. Every once in a while, they would send scar-level void masters to the divine power universe. The void universe had already exhausted all its resources during the Great Catastrophe War. Just for the sake of fate energy for the void universe, my entire divine power universe has fallen. Jian Wushuang's star-like eyes reflected a large star field. "I'll make you pay back double for what you've eaten." In a desolate star field, Jian Wushuang, dressed as a young ranger, stopped. In just 10,000 years, the land of gods where Palace Master Dao Yen was sealed had become dilapidated and desolate until it was destroyed. The 99 divine power restrictions had long since ceased to exist, and any 4-scar void master could break them with force. The more it was so, the more Jian Wushuang panicked. He did not want to believe that the supreme Dao Yen would die just like that, so he immediately urged his divine power to enter the land of gods. The 99 divine power restrictions disappeared automatically and opened up a path for Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang was stunned when he stepped into the land of gods. The dilapidated walls that were originally as large as hills and ravines had disappeared. In their place was a green lotus that grew to the sky. Every inch of the land was filled with green lotuses, swaying with the wind. Apart from the green lotuses, there was nothing else. Senior Brother Dao Yen. Senior Brother Dao Yen. Jian Wushuang walked forward and his voice reverberated through the entire world. The green lotus contained a divine rhythm, which was transformed from the body of the Supreme Dao Yen. Jian Wushuang did not know if the Supreme Dao Yen had died, so he could only follow his aura to find his whereabouts. For 15 days, he searched the hills and ravines tirelessly, but there was no trace of him. Could it be that Senior Brother Dao Yen has really died? A trace of sadness flashed through his eyes. Junior Brother Wushuang, how have you been? Like the spring breeze and summer cicadas, an indescribably pleasant and warm voice sounded. Jian Wushuang quivered and hurriedly looked behind him. Senior Brother Dao Yen. Jian Wushuang jumped up and ran to Dao Yen excitedly. Dao Yen had recovered a little since the last time they met. His dry face had begun to recover and looked a little more refreshed. Wushuang, why did you risk your life to come here? Dao Yen said, I can sense that the aura left behind by that existence is extremely weak. Has our universe won? Jian Wushuang's eyes dimmed, and he told Dao Yen everything that had happened. Even now, it is still unknown how powerful Cosmos God is. Jian Wushuang found it difficult to continue. Supreme Dao Yan's body swayed as he looked at the sky that was forever dark. He shed tears and said, The heavenly Dao! How can the heavenly Dao be like this? As long as I'm still alive, I'll definitely slaughter all the enemies. Jian Wushuang said hatefully, I'll use my life to change the heavens. I, Dao Yen, swear to protect the divine power universe with my life. Dao Yan's tears fell. But now my Dao realm has returned to its original state. I can't turn the situation around. Jian Wushuang took a step forward and said, Senior Brother, it's okay. Now, leave this place with me. I'll take you to a land of great creation. After comprehending for more than 10,000 years, you'll definitely be able to return to your peak. Dao Yan's eyes were filled with hope, but then they dimmed again. Silly junior brother, I can't leave now. Once I leave, the aura left by Void God will definitely fight back crazily. I'm afraid you won't be able to leave then. Jian Wushuang said firmly, Senior brother, I'm not the same person as before. As long as he doesn't come in person, I can protect you even if he's a half-ancestor realm expert. Then, without waiting for Dao Yen to speak, Jian Wushuang waved his hand and used divine power to pick the natal green lotus under Dao Yen. In an instant, the entire land of gods collapsed. Countless green lotuses withered like rivers and seas falling. The dispersed spiritual power returned to the origin of the green lotus. At the same time, a majestic voice that seemed to have traveled through the primeval times resounded. Dao Yen, why do you want to step out of the restriction? Aren't you afraid of your soul being destroyed? The sky caved in, and endless void power descended. Black flames so dense that they were almost tangible covered the entire sky, and a giant face of chaos looked down at the earth. His eyes, which were like the sun and stars, shone on the ground. Jian Wushuang saw it clearly. The huge face was the true shadow of Void God in the Void universe. Dao Yen snorted and did not look at him. Instead, he sent a message to Jian Wushuang. Junior Brother Wushuang, I will fight him with my divine soul later. You should take the time to escape and save the last flame for my divine power universe. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang shook his head gently and said, Senior Brother Dao Yen, I'm telling you now that I'm not the same as before. Even if his true shadow comes, I'm not afraid at all. At the end of his words, a vast divine power suddenly surged up like a huge wind that hit the sky. The two completely different forces clashed together, creating the most magnificent light. The divine power that belonged to Jian Wushuang under the pressure of the void power was actually able to be equal to it, and there was a faint trend of rising. What? In the sky? The giant face asked doubtfully. Such an ant can actually emit such an aura. No wonder you dare to step out of the thunder pool. Dao Yen, Since that's the case, then all of you shall stay here today. As the sound of a bell rang out, the endless void power suddenly condensed into a huge palm that covered the sky and pressed down heavily. Jian Wushuang was not afraid. He snorted coldly and his palms emitted a brilliant scarlet gold divine light. Ancestral skill. Transcendence Heavenly Gate. The majestic heavenly gate broke through the dark void power and landed in the sky, emitting an endless majesty. Treasure light circulated and the giant sun shone. A giant finger that reached the heavens appeared from the heaven's gate. With a brilliant divine might, it met the giant palm that covered the sky. Boom! The two collided, and an extremely dark void power and brilliant divine might erupted in the most intense explosion. The 7 colored shockwaves destroyed the sky, and a chasm appeared on the ground. The foul air of the abyss gushed out. At the moment of collision, blood gushed out of Jian Wushuang's ears and nose. The black robe on his body was torn and the divine patterns around him dimmed. The giant palm and the giant finger of the heavenly gate were in a stalemate. The divine power and void power completely tore the land of gods apart. The giant face in the sky was no longer expressionless. Under the heaven's gate's finger, it also quickly dimmed. Although the face was void god's true shadow, this was Jian Wushuang's home field. The giant face was shocked and furious. How dare you? Jian Wushuang did not say anything, but his eyes were shining with golden light. In the past, I risked my life and used all my abilities just to escape your palm strike. Now that I can resist you with only one move, what can you do to me? A brilliant divine might gushed out from the heavenly gate, dispelling the endless dark void power. Even if I'm just a true shadow, I can annihilate all of you. The sky collapsed, and the giant face opened its mouth to swallow the finger of heavenly gate, then crushed it to the ground. The transcendence heavenly gate instantly dimmed. How can an ant's power fight against the power of the heavens and earth? Divine blood seeped out of Jian Wushuang's mouth, and the divine patterns around him started to dissipate. A gentle divine power wrapped around Jian Wushuang's waist and pulled him in front of Supreme Dao Yen. Junior brother Wushuang, I am very grateful that you came to save me. Let me end all this karma. Dao Yen smiled and then pushed Jian Wushuang far away with pure divine power. Then, Supreme Dao Yen turned his body into a green lotus, and a vast green charm rushed into the sky. Jian Wushuang's eyes almost popped out. Senior brother Dao Yen. Countless tragedies were ultimately caused by the lack of strength. Now, this tragedy was about to repeat itself. The originally dim golden pattern suddenly shattered and turned into a shocking dragon that soared into the sky. With Jian Wushuang as the center, the brilliant divine power pierced through the sky and directly entered the transcendence heavenly gate. The incomparably bright red light was like 100 suns shining together. It was only a blurry outline of the extreme darkness heavenly gate, but Jian Wushuang used it without caring about the cost. The might that could pierce through all things had long surpassed the pressure of the giant finger. The illusions of almost 1,000 divine weapons appeared and linked with each other, giving off an overwhelming aura. Void God's giant face, which was almost falling to the ground, suddenly stopped and could not move an inch further. The images of the divine weapons intertwined with each other, as if divine punishment had fallen. The two star-like pupils looked at Jian Wushuang and shattered after he said the last sentence. We will meet again. Everything returned to earth, and Void God's true shadow shattered. The heavenly gate above the broken sky slowly disappeared. Jian Wushuang was like a dying fish, kneeling on the ground and gasping for breath. With his green aura restrained, Dao Yen, who was dressed in a green robe, helped Jian Wushuang up. Junior brother Wushuang, I thank you. Supreme Dao Yen cupped his hands and said. The gentle divine power nourished Jian Wushuang's dried meridians and helped him recover quickly. Senior brother Dao Yen. Jian Wushuang stood up straight and said seriously, Don't thank me. This is what I should and must do. Even if I die, I will save you. Dao Yen stopped talking and nodded with red eyes. The battle with Void God's true shadow had completely destroyed the land of gods, and the entire star field had crumbled and collapsed. It would take hundreds of chaos cycles to repair it. As the commotion was too big, there were already scar-level void warriors who had begun to rush over. After Jian Wushuang set up a ward with a wave of his hand, he left with Dao Yan in the cosmic boat. His next destination was the God-refining sect. Supreme Panshan, who had been dormant for tens of thousands of chaos cycles, was also Banshan, the Taoist from the Divine Power universe. After traveling through the various star fields for several months, they finally stopped at a very familiar star field. That was the God-refining sect's territory. Jian Wushuang and Dao Yan transformed their bodies again and went straight to the God-refining sect. Although Jian Wushuang was currently a half-invincible supreme, he could easily kill an invincible supreme with his superpower. Thus, it was a piece of cake for him to hide his aura. Although Dao Yan could not turn divine power into void power, his aura had reached its peak, so it was not difficult for ordinary void masters to not notice him. A gust of wind blew into the God-refining sect, waking up the two disciples guarding the gate. After muttering a few words to each other, they fell asleep again. In a brightly lit hall different from the gloomy God-refining sect, Elder Banshan had been sitting in the middle of his sleeping quarters for tens of thousands of years. Since Jian Wushuang had left, he had been in deep comprehension. Green smoke rose from the incense burner, and Elder Banshan, who had been silent for tens of thousands of years, slowly opened his eyes. In the bottom of his heart, an inexplicable feeling rose. The palace door, which had not been opened for a long time, was gently pushed open. A figure dressed in a ranger's attire appeared in his eyes. Behind the ranger, an elegant green robe appeared. The young ranger slowly pulled down his hood and said with a smile, "Elder Banshan, you can go home now." As if struck by lightning, all the sounds faded into Elder Banshan's ears. At this moment, the only thing in his eyes was that figure he had not seen for countless chaos cycles. "Long time no see, little guy." An experienced smile appeared on Dao Yan's face, his eyes slightly red. "Palace Master, Palace Master." Elder Banshan stood up and ran in front of Dao Yan. Then, he knelt down heavily and cried sorrowfully. The past was turbulent, and the old people reappeared. From the peddlers to the heavenly gods, it was likely that even they would find it difficult to resist the suffering and extraordinary past. No one would have thought that these two old friends would meet again in this lifetime. When they first met, the two had black hair and were the unparalleled experts, and the pride of the divine power universe. When they met again after all the suffering, they were already in their senior age. Jian Wushuang sighed with emotion and left the hall to let the two catch up. "Palace Master Dao Yan, you've suffered." Elder Banshan wiped his tears and sobbed. Dao Yan wiped his tears. "It's been hundreds of millions of years. I didn't expect that we would meet again. I only hope that we won't be separated again this time. Apart from death in this life, I will not leave you, Palace Master," Banshan Taoist said with tears in his eyes. Dao Yan did not say anything more, but clenched Banshan Taoist's hand tightly. These two old friends did not need to say anything more to each other. As the sun moved and the stars slanted, the palace door was slowly pushed open. Banshan knelt on one knee and said solemnly, "Greetings, Palace Master Wushuang. From now on, I'll follow Palace Master Wushuang's orders, even if it costs me 10,000 lives." Jian Wushuang quickly helped Taoist Banshan up. "Let's leave this place first. We'll make plans after we return to the divine power universe." Dao Yan and Banshan agreed and left the God-refining sect with Jian Wushuang. Almost endless years had passed in this void universe. The cage of time had finally been broken. Even dying on the off-world battlefield was the best ending. Jian Wushuang sat on the railing of the universe boat and looked out. Supreme Dao Yan and Banshan stood on the deck and finally took in the entire star field of the void universe. In at most a year, the cosmic boat would be able to leave the void universe. At that time, Jian Wushuang would take advantage of the time when Void God was sealed to launch a full-scale counterattack. The Devourers, what kind of people are they? Jian Wushuang was lost in thought. Void God had been sealed for more than 10,000 years, and there was no sign of his return at all. With Supreme Dao Yan, who had experienced the last great catastrophe, in addition to the Starry Sky Sword sect and the Invincible Supremes from the Dragon, Phoenix, and Qilin clans, they should be able to barely match the number of 6 Scar Void Masters in the Void Universe. Jian Wushuang was confident that although he could not kill Snake God, he could at least stall him. In this way, they were at least even in the high-end battlefield, and the battle of the ordinary battlefields were the home base of the Divine Power Universe. They could drag the ordinary Void Masters of the Void Universe to death. As long as they could kill as many living forces in the Void Universe as possible, even if Void God returned, it would take an extremely long time to start the next great catastrophe. In Jian Wushuang's calculation, only the Devourers, the mysterious organization, was a great variable. He had personally experienced how terrifying the Devourers was. If it had not been for Supreme Gai Fu, he would have probably died at the hands of Devour One. What kind of organization are they? What's their goal? Are their demands the same as the Void Universe? The more Jian Wushuang thought about it, the more he felt a headache. Palace Master Wushuang, what's bothering you? Can you tell me? Asked Supreme Dao Yen. Jian Wushuang pondered for a moment and then jumped onto the deck. He asked, Elder Dao Yen, do you know that there's an organization called the Devourers in the Void Universe? Supreme Dao Yan's eyes narrowed. Did the Devourers take part in this great catastrophe? Jian Wushuang nodded and said, they've already made their moves. From the looks of it, their strength is probably not weaker than half-ancestor realm. Half-ancestor level. Have they already grown to such a level? Dao Yan's eyes were bitter. I knew about the Devourers before the last great catastrophe war. Actually, the Devourers was the first organization to appear in our Divine Power universe. I had a Dao discussion with Devouring Emperor. Dao Yen said slowly as he recalled his distant memories. However, that Dao discussion ended on bad terms. From then on, they left the Divine Power universe and became a nightmare that can't be wiped away. Then, does Elder Dao Yen know what they really need? Is it really the fate energy of our Divine Power universe? Jian Wushuang asked urgently. Supreme Dao Yen shook his head and said, he and his Devour team seem to be in a very contradictory situation. During the Dao discussion, Devouring Emperor promised to help our Divine Power universe repel the enemy. But he didn't ask for any conditions that were beneficial to him. He only asked for one thing, which was to kill the Void universe completely and leave no living being alive. I didn't agree to his request. Even if we invaded the Void universe first, I knew I couldn't kill every living being. So, he left the Divine Power universe and joined the Void universe. If you're asking why he and the Devourers helped the Void universe, it's probably because Void God agreed to his request. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang shuddered. The Devouring Emperor of the Devourers was like a special existence independent of two universes. Their purpose had never been to fight for the fate energy. Instead, the universe that was defeated would be completely reduced to a dead zone, leaving no living beings behind. The two universes seemed to have become toys in his hands, and they would not stop until it is done. After a moment of silence, Jian Wushuang suddenly said, Elder Dao Yen, if it really comes to that, I should make a deal with them for the sake of the Divine Power universe. Palace Master Wushuang, are all living beings just pawns in the ancient universe? Jian Wushuang shook his head. After a while, he said, one day, I'll find Master and ask him. In the cold and dry ancient star field, the cosmic boat was the only thing moving. Half a year later, they were in the void country in the Haohua star field. He could no longer travel freely in the cosmic boat. Jian Wushuang, Dao Yen, and Ban Shan were dressed like rangers to avoid unnecessary trouble. Even so, the journey was extremely dangerous. Jian Wushuang had killed more than 20 Void Masters. In 3 months at most, we will be able to leave this place and reach the Divine Power universe, Jian Wushuang said after he finished replenishing his supplies in the Void country. Although Supreme Dao Yen and Taoist Ban Shan looked calm, the excitement in their eyes still revealed their inner feelings. They had been away from home for too long, so long that most of the Divine Kingdom had turned to dust, not to mention these old men, who still had ties with the old generation. In order to avoid too many unnecessary troubles, the 3 rangers tried their best to travel in a roundabout way from the lonely star field. Perhaps the opening of the door to the 23rd crack had alerted the Void Universe, for the rarely seen Void Masters had also appeared in various star fields. In the countdown before he left the Void Universe, Jian Wushuang sensed a weak but extremely familiar aura in the sky above the Void Country in the Haohua star field. That aura was the divine power of the divine power universe. Supreme Dao Yen and Ban Shan also sensed the divine power and looked at Jian Wushuang. As the two universes were still in a heated battle, Jian Wushuang thought for a moment and decided to let the two of them hide in the Void Country while he went to investigate the situation alone. After telling each other to be careful, Jian Wushuang's figure flashed and he stood on the starry sky. In the endless starry sky, 4 or 5 cosmic boats of the Void Universe were traveling through the sky. The weak divine power had come from the first boat. With a quick thought, Jian Wushuang's body moved like a rainbow and he boarded the deck of the first cosmic boat. "Who's there?" With a low shout, a 4-scar Void Master walked out from the bottom of the cabin and looked at Jian Wushuang vigilantly. "I've come a long way. I'd like to ask for a bowl of water from your excellency," Jian Wushuang said. As he stepped forward, he grabbed at the air. Suddenly, the Void Warrior with 4 scars kneeled on the ground, unable to speak, his face full of pain. "Tell me, did you capture someone from the divine power universe?" Jian Wushuang said angrily. The fear of life and death made this Void Master speak without hiding anything. "Yes, we did catch one, but she was just a little girl with little strength. My lord saw that she was born with red lips and white teeth, and was ready to take her in as a slave." Before he could finish his words, Jian Wushuang crushed him into meat paste and destroyed his spirit. Then he took a few steps back and looked down at the deck with cold eyes. An even purer and more tyrannical power than that of an invincible supreme burst forth. What kind of small fry dares to act so brazenly here? A domineering and powerful void energy tore the entire deck apart, triggering bursts of purple-blue divine lightning.